The fire is already spreading. You can hear it crackling, distant but growing louder. The windows of the building glow with flickering orange light. You're standing outside, just far enough to be safe, and someone is screaming. You know what's inside: your dog and a stranger. The firefighters haven't arrived. No one else is coming. You have only a few seconds to decide what to do. You can save one, not both. And you have to choose now. You hesitate, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about the wrong thing, or the thing that feels wrong to care about. You're not deciding between a life and a life. You're deciding between something you love and someone you don't even know. You tell yourself the answer should be obvious. A human life outweighs a dog's. You've heard that all your life. You believe it. You say it. But in this moment, when the heat is real, when the screaming won't stop, you aren't thinking in abstractions. You're thinking of your dog's face. The sound of their paws on the floor when you come home. The way they look at you like you're the center of their entire world. You try to remind yourself the stranger has a family, a future, maybe children, maybe someone who loves them just as much as you love your dog, maybe even more. But you don't know them. You've never met them. You don't even know their name. They're just a fact inside the fire. And your dog isn't a fact. Your dog is everything. You can already feel the guilt forming, even before you choose. Because no matter what you decide, something innocent dies. Something that didn't ask for any of this. You think about running in, trying to save both. But deep down you know that won't work. You'll lose everything. They'll both die. Maybe you too. So you have to decide. You wonder what it says about you that your instinct pulls toward your dog. You try to reason it away. You tell yourself it's attachment, not principle. Emotion, not morality. But still, the pull is there. And then something worse enters your mind. What if you choose the stranger and your dog dies screaming, alone, terrified, thinking you abandoned them? Could you ever walk through your front door again and not feel the absence? Could you ever forgive yourself for letting them die in exchange for someone you'll never see again? But the other side is no better. What if you choose your dog? What if the stranger burns because you couldn't let go of something familiar? What if that stranger had a child waiting at home? What if they were kind, generous, someone who would have made the world better? If only you had acted differently. You try to escape the thought by retreating into logic. Utilitarian math. One life versus another. But the math never helps when it's your hands that have to move, your legs that have to run. And then a darker realization, maybe this choice isn't about what's right or wrong. Maybe it's about what you're capable of. What part of yourself you're willing to live with after the smoke clears. Maybe you already know the answer, and you're just afraid to admit it out loud. Afraid to face the version of yourself that would let a person die for a pet, or the version that would sacrifice your dog for a moral ideal you only believe when nothing's at stake. You think of the stranger's final moments. Do they know what's happening? Are they calling for help? Are they waiting for someone to save them? Waiting for you? And at the same time, you think of your dog, not as a symbol, not as a question, but as a presence, a heartbeat, a pair of eyes that trusted you without condition, every day of their life. You want the decision to feel noble. You want it to reveal your strength, your character, but it doesn't. It only reveals that morality, when lived, is never clean. It's never noble. It's just pain, in one direction or another. You take a step forward, toward the building, toward the choice, and in that moment, everything you've ever believed about yourself, every moral line, every abstract conviction collapses into one quiet question. Who do you let die when both of them think you're coming to save them? Who would you be without your illusions? Not the big ones, the grand conspiracies or elaborate fantasies. The small ones. The ordinary ones. The kind that hide in habits, in assumptions, in how you tell yourself the day went. Consider someone who says they're happy. Not just content, but truly happy, peaceful, fulfilled. The kind of person who smiles easily, who tells you life is good, who insists they're doing great. You've met people like this. You might even be one of them. But how do they really know? What exactly are they measuring? Most people think happiness is a signal, that it tells you something true, that if you feel good, life must be good. But feeling isn't evidence. Emotions don't prove anything. They just exist. They just happen. Now ask, what if that feeling of happiness doesn't come from reality, but from the stories someone tells themselves about reality? You had a fight with your partner, but you call it a misunderstanding. You hate your job, but you say it's a stepping stone. You feel isolated, but tell yourself you prefer being alone. These aren't facts, they're adjustments. Tiny edits to memory, framing devices. They smooth the edges, mute the contradictions. They allow discomfort to exist without being named, and it works. The lie doesn't have to be grand to be effective. It only has to be believable enough to keep the system running, believable enough to keep you moving. That's the trick of it. Most happiness isn't built on joy. It's built on interpretation. It doesn't matter what's happening. It matters how you explain it to yourself afterward. Think of someone with a painful past, abuse, betrayal, abandonment. But they say it made them stronger. They say they're grateful for it. Is that true, or is it a coping mechanism, so practiced it became indistinguishable from belief? Now think about how easily belief can become habit. You repeat the story often enough, and it becomes part of your identity. You don't question it anymore. You can't, because if the story is a lie, then who are you without it? That's what's at stake. Not happiness, but the foundation it rests on. And here's the deeper problem. The happier someone is, the harder it becomes to challenge their story, because happiness becomes proof. Circular, airtight, self-sustaining. I'm happy, therefore my beliefs must be correct. But what if happiness isn't a result of truth? What if it's just a result of alignment, of making your beliefs match your desires, no matter how distorted the fit? You tell yourself you're lucky, even when you're not. You tell yourself things are fair, even when they aren't. You call selfishness boundaries and apathy detachment. You convert fear into caution, insecurity into humility, bitterness into wisdom. And with each conversion, the story grows smoother, simpler, more tolerable, until you can't tell the difference anymore between peace and repression. This is how people build lives that feel good on the inside, but look strange from the outside. Lives that don't quite make sense if you examine them too closely. But you're not supposed to examine them. You're supposed to nod, smile, accept. And maybe you do the same thing. Maybe your own happiness is stitched together from pieces you don't look at too closely. Maybe you've edited out the uncomfortable parts, the failures, the things that don't fit. Maybe your sense of peace depends entirely on not asking certain questions. Because asking would unravel something. And once it starts to unravel, you don't know where it stops. You might find that your relationship isn't safe, just familiar, that your ambition isn't purpose, just distraction, that your calm isn't acceptance, just numbness, that your joy isn't real. It's just what you say out loud, so you don't have to admit you feel nothing. That's the risk of honesty. It doesn't just reveal the truth, It destabilizes everything the lie was holding in place. And maybe that's why the happiest people are often the most resistant to scrutiny. Not because they're hiding something from others, but because they're hiding something from themselves. And to look directly at it would mean tearing down the scaffolding their happiness is built on. And maybe that's why you lie to yourself too. Not out of malice, not even out of weakness, but because the alternative, seeing things as they really are, might be unbearable. Not because the truth is too painful, but because deep down you suspect that if you stopped lying to yourself, you might never feel happy again. Would you torture someone if the button was yours? Don't answer quickly. Sit with it. Imagine it for real. You're standing in a room alone. There's a single button in front of you. It's small, unmarked. Next to it, a screen. On the screen is a stranger, bound, breathing, awake. You're told that if you press the button, they will feel pain, real pain, sharp, specific, undeniable. But they won't die. They won't even be permanently injured. And they won't know who you are. They'll just suffer for a while, and then it will stop. You're told that pressing the button accomplishes nothing. There's no reward, no consequence, no greater good, just pain, pure and purposeless. Most people say they wouldn't press it. They say it's wrong. They say it's cruel. But they say that with the button far away, with no one watching, with no silence hanging in the room like it does now, things feel different when you're the only one who knows, when the power is yours alone. So now ask yourself again, would you press it? You think about curiosity, not malice, not hatred, just curiosity. What does it feel like to cause pain, not by accident, not by indifference, but directly, intentionally? You don't want to destroy them, you just want to know. What does that kind of control feel like? Is it as awful as you imagine, or somehow satisfying? Would it feel like guilt or power? You might think, even if just for a second, maybe once, just to see. And in that moment, something inside you shifts. It's not that you want them to suffer. You don't even know them. That's part of what makes it easier. They're just a face, a body, pain without history, suffering without narrative. You don't know their name. You don't know what they've done. You tell yourself that matters. That if they were a good person, maybe it would be different. But then again, how much do you really need to know before you feel justified? Because justification always arrives late. It shows up just after the decision's already made, just after your finger twitches, just after the click. Then the reasons pour in. Maybe they deserve it. Maybe this helps you understand something deeper. Maybe it teaches you a lesson about empathy. Maybe. You imagine pressing it more than once, first as a test, then again because the feeling was less terrible than you expected, then again to see if the sensation changes. It's not addictive, exactly. It's just accessible, available, no real cost, no visible scar. You wouldn't call it torture. That word feels too big, too cinematic, too cruel. This is something smaller, something quiet, a private act with no audience and no consequence. But if someone else described it to you, if someone else admitted they did this, you'd call them monstrous. You'd feel disgust, righteousness, distance. But now the distance is gone. You're still in the room. The button is still there. The screen still shows a person, breathing, helpless, real, and the only thing between them and pain is your hesitation. And what happens if you're told there is a purpose, that pressing the button helps you, makes you feel better, relieves your anxiety, calms your nerves? Would that change anything? Would you tell yourself it's worth it now? A small cost for peace, a little suffering for stability. And then, what if you're told they're guilty, that they've done terrible things, that they've hurt others, that they deserve pain? Suddenly the button doesn't feel like torture, it feels like justice. But the truth is, you still don't know them. You're still just guessing. And the button still does the same thing. It makes someone suffer, quietly, invisibly, by your hand. It doesn't take much for cruelty to feel righteous. Now you wonder how many people have already made that choice. Not in a room, not with a button, but in other ways. In small, detached actions that caused harm from a distance. The policies they vote for, the companies they support, the people they ignore, the pain they cause without touching it. It's easier to push the button when you're not the one screaming. And here's what disturbs you most. Not the thought that others would press it, but the quiet realization that you might, that you could. That given the right silence, the right room, the right lie, you'd find a reason. You'd convince yourself it was okay, necessary, maybe even deserved. Because morality is loud in theory, but it's silent in practice. It doesn't shout when you're alone. It doesn't stop your hand. It doesn't pull you back. And maybe the question isn't whether you'd press the button. Maybe the question is why you're not entirely sure you wouldn't. Every face you've ever seen was a guess, not a photograph, not a fact. A guess your brain stitched together in a split second based on shadows, motion, memory, and expectation. That means the face of your mother was a guess. The face of your partner, your friend, the person you loved the most, all of them, guesses, reconstructions, estimates. Your brain took fragments of information, filled in the blanks, and handed you what it assumed you wanted to see. And most of the time, it gets close. Close enough that you never notice. Close enough that it feels like truth. But not always. Sometimes it guesses wrong, subtly wrong. The kind of wrong you can't quite explain. But you feel it anyway, that split-second discomfort. When a face looks familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The confusion when someone you know well suddenly looks off. You don't know why. You just feel it. And that's because the illusion slipped. Your brain couldn't complete the guess cleanly, so it gave you something broken. Something that almost worked, but not quite. You've experienced it before. Maybe walking past a mirror at the wrong angle. Seeing a photo of yourself taken unexpectedly. A strange sinking sense that your own face doesn't belong to you. As if you're looking at someone else. That's not a glitch. That's your brain failing to guess correctly. Failing to reconstruct the version of your face it thought you wanted to see. It should disturb you. Because it means the face you think of as you isn't real either. It's a guess too. A composite. Built from memories, distortions, internal bias, and the quiet pressure to believe you are coherent and consistent. You see your face every day, but only through your brain's reconstruction. You've never truly seen what you look like. No one has, not even you. And it goes deeper. If every face is a guess, then so is every expression, every smile, every frown. When someone looks sad, your brain fills in what sadness looks like. But what if it's wrong? What if they're angry, or afraid, or nothing at all? What if your brain just reached for the easiest match and decided without asking you that sadness made the most sense? You respond emotionally. You comfort them. You feel compassion. But it might be for a version of them that doesn't exist. The reverse is true too. People see your face, they react to your expression. They form feelings, opinions, attachments, all based on guesses, not who you are, not even what you're showing, just what they think you're showing. So every human connection is filtered through a barrier of unconscious estimation. Every glance, every smile, every tear, none of it is truly direct. None of it is untouched. You're always a few layers removed from the other person, and they're always a few layers removed from you. Even recognition, The moment when someone says, "I know that face," is a guess. Not a stored image, but a feeling. A vague pattern match. That's why you sometimes recognize someone you've never met, or fail to recognize someone you've known for years. The pattern didn't align well enough. The guess fell apart. And the implications are worse than they seem. If every face is a guess, then so is every memory involving a face. Every time you picture someone in your mind, you're not retrieving an image, you're reconstructing one from scratch. Every time. And like any reconstruction, it changes a little each time it's built. Over the years, the face of someone you love becomes less of who they were and more of what your brain imagines they were. You don't remember people, you recreate them. So when you miss someone who's gone, you're not missing them exactly. You're missing a version of them your brain made up, a face that never truly existed, except in the specific shifting language of your perception. And there's no way to know how far off those guesses really are. Maybe they're close, maybe they're wildly wrong. Maybe the face you loved most never looked the way you remember. Maybe the person who hurt you wore a different face entirely. All you have are guesses, all anyone has. Even facial recognition systems, designed by humans, reflect this guessing process. They make the same kinds of mistakes we do. They misidentify. They confuse strangers for friends. They apply assumptions that lead to errors, sometimes harmless, sometimes catastrophic. But it's not the software failing. It's mirroring the limitations of the people who built it. So what does that mean for identity, for truth? If your own face isn't reliable, if no face is, how do you trust anything built on appearance? Every time you look at someone, remember you're not seeing them. You're seeing an approximation. You're reacting to a best guess model your brain constructed in the moment. And they're doing the same to you. Maybe that's why relationships are so hard. Maybe that's why we're always a little misunderstood. Because no one has ever truly seen anyone else. Not fully, not directly. Just shadows of intentions and approximations of presence. And maybe the scariest part is this. If every face is a guess, then so is every connection, every memory, every version of love. And it means you've never really seen the people closest to you, not even once. You remember graduating. You remember moving out. You remember your first heartbreak, the job you lost, the moment you felt truly alone. You remember the loud things, the visible ones, the ones you rehearsed, repeated, wrapped stories around, but not the one that changed you, because it didn't feel like anything at the time. No dramatic lighting, no music, no recognition, just a small moment. A quiet one, a passing glance, a split-second choice, a sentence overheard but not fully understood. It slipped by so quickly, so invisibly, that it never even registered. But afterward, everything was different. You already forgot it, and that's what makes it so disturbing. You like to think the defining moments of your life are obvious, that if something changed you, transformed you, left a permanent mark, you would know. You'd feel it happening. You'd notice. But what if that's never been true? What if the most important turning points in your life were the ones you didn't see? Maybe it was the day you chose not to speak up, the moment you turned away instead of stepping in. Maybe it was something you never even noticed, an expression on someone's face that you misunderstood. A moment of silence that echoed louder than any scream. Maybe someone told you something once, something they believed about you, and you accepted it quietly. Not because it was true, but because it was easier than resisting. You carried that belief with you for years, not realizing it wasn't yours. You shaped your life around it. And now, you can't even remember who said it, or when. It's gone. But the change remains. You keep trying to track your life by milestones, events with dates and photographs and names. But the real shifts, the ones that shaped how you see yourself, how you trust, what you fear, those happened in moments so subtle they vanished the instant they occurred. And that's the trap. Because if you can't remember the moment that defined you, how can you question it? How can you undo it? You're living in the consequences of a moment you don't even recognize. You keep telling yourself that you are who you are because of what you've survived, what you've chosen, what you've learned. But what if that's only part of the story? What if who you are now was determined by a decision you didn't consciously make? A moment when you absorbed someone else's fear, when you learned to flinch without realizing why, when you stopped trusting without knowing what broke. You didn't decide to become this version of yourself. It happened without you. And now you can't find your way back. You tell yourself you remember the important things. But memory isn't truth. It's reconstruction. And it favors the loud, the repeated, the emotionally vivid. But the most dangerous changes are the quiet ones, the ones that don't hurt, the ones that feel like nothing. And so you forget them. Maybe it was the first time you felt ignored, but didn't know what to call it. Or the first time you laughed at something that didn't feel funny, just to fit in. Maybe it was when someone broke a promise, and you told yourself it didn't matter. You kept going. But something in you shifted. You learned not to expect much. Not to speak first. Not to hope out loud. Not all trauma feels like pain. Sometimes it feels like silence, like nothing changed, but something closed. And by the time you notice, it's already part of you. The truly dangerous moments aren't the ones you remember. They're the ones you can't. Because those are the ones you can't protect yourself from, can't question, can't heal. You feel this tension now, don't you? This sense that something in you was shaped by a force you never named. You've lived your life trying to fix something, but you're not sure what. You've been trying to become someone else, but you don't know who you were before. Because you never saw the moment it happened, and that's what keeps you stuck. There's a reason some people never change, no matter how much they want to. It's not because they're weak or stubborn. It's because the thing they're trying to undo is buried in a moment they can't remember. A moment they never noticed. A moment that felt like nothing. But nothing can be very powerful when it happens at the right time. You're not afraid of remembering pain. You're afraid of remembering the parts of yourself that changed without your consent. The small decisions that weren't decisions. The moment you became someone who flinches, someone who hides, someone who forgets. And now you're here, wondering why you feel hollow in places you can't name. Why certain things make you ache, even though nothing bad happened. Why you react the way you do, even when it makes no sense. You're trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. And the worst part is, you threw them away without knowing. Because the moment that defined you didn't look like a moment at all. It just looked like another day, another glance, another breath, and now it's gone. And you're still carrying what it left behind. Why do children cry when something feels unfair? Not just when they lose, not just when they're hurt, but when the rules are broken. When someone cheats, when a promise is broken, when the bad guy wins. It's a different kind of pain, not physical, not even emotional in the usual sense. It's a fracture in the world as they understand it. A disruption in something they believed was unbreakable. Children believe in justice the way they believe in gravity. They assume fairness is built into the structure of reality. That good things happen to good people. That bad actions are punished. That someone is watching somewhere, making sure the world stays balanced. And when that doesn't happen, when the cruel child wins, when the apology doesn't come, when the lie is rewarded, they don't just feel disappointed, they feel betrayed. They've been handed a version of the world that doesn't match the one they were promised, and they don't know what to do with that. But instead of explaining it to them, we start teaching them to accept it. We tell them to let it go, to stop overreacting, that life isn't fair, that sometimes the wrong people win. We say these things with calm voices, as if we're offering wisdom, but what we're doing is breaking something inside them, quietly, slowly, inevitably. Because at first, children don't want to believe us. They resist. They insist that the world should make sense. They ask questions that are too sharp, too honest. Why didn't the teacher stop him? Why didn't anyone help? Why does she get another chance after cheating? These aren't complaints. They're warnings. They're signals that something important is being dismantled inside them. And we respond with shrugs, with silence, with rules that contradict themselves. We say it's wrong to lie, but we lie to avoid confrontation. We say hard work pays off, but we quietly favor the easy choice. We say everyone is equal, but they see how quickly kindness disappears when someone is different. They notice more than we admit. They notice who gets forgiven, who gets believed, who gets protected, and who gets ignored. And slowly they begin to understand. They stop pointing out contradictions. They stop expecting things to feel fair. Not because they've grown wise, but because they've learned it hurts too much to keep believing. They stop crying about justice, not because they've matured, but because they've started to numb themselves. They adjust their expectations downward. They stop looking for fairness and start looking for advantage. They learn that silence protects them, that cynicism shields them, that trust is dangerous, that kindness can make you a target, and we call this growing up. We praise them for being realistic. We say they're tough, mature, grounded. But what we're really praising is a kind of quiet surrender. They've stopped believing in justice because we showed them over and over that justice is conditional, performative, selective. We told them to do the right thing, even when no one's watching. And then we showed them that what really matters is who's watching. So now they learn to perform, to curate, to survive. And maybe the worst part is how grateful we feel when they finally stop fighting back. When they stop pushing for fairness. When they learn to play the game. We say they've found strength. But what they've really found is resignation. Because the belief in justice doesn't die all at once. It unravels, it gets chipped away by moments that seem small, but aren't. The coach who plays favorites. The adult who dismisses their pain. The friend who lies and gets away with it. Each time, something essential is taken from them. And one day, they stop expecting things to be fair at all. Not because they've learned a deeper truth, but because they've been taught to live in a world that punishes those who still believe. And maybe, quietly, they start to believe something else instead. That the world isn't about justice, that it never was, that it's about control, about perception, about knowing how to lose quietly, how to win without being seen, how to hide your need for fairness behind a mask of indifference. Because nothing protects you more than not needing justice in the first place. And so they stop crying. Not because it doesn't hurt anymore, but because there's no one left to explain why it should. What if the person you think you are doesn't really exist? Not in the way you assume, not with the consistency you imagine. There's a version of you that your brain protects at all costs. A version that is coherent, capable, moral, good. And any information that threatens that version gets quietly erased before you even notice it was there. You remember what supports your image. You forget what doesn't. It happens automatically, invisibly. You make a mistake, but instead of acknowledging it, your memory edits the moment. You reframe your intention. You soften the consequence. You imagine a justification that wasn't there at the time, and then you believe it. Not as a lie, but as truth. This isn't deception. This is maintenance. Your brain protects your ego by filtering reality. Anything too painful, too humiliating, too contradictory gets distorted or deleted. Not to fool others, but to preserve the illusion for yourself. The illusion that you are consistent, rational, worthy. But that illusion has a cost, because now you're walking through a world that doesn't quite match what's real. You're responding to problems that aren't there, ignoring threats that are. You're trusting memories that have been cleaned up, rewritten, softened. You're believing motives that never existed. And the worst part is, it feels natural, effortless, true. You think you remember clearly. You don't. You think you know yourself. You don't. You assume that because you can recall a story, the story must be accurate. But your memories are shaped by what you need to believe, not what actually happened. Every time you recall something, it changes, gets reconstructed, aligned with your current understanding of who you are. The more you remember it, the less true it becomes. And still you trust it, because without that trust, your sense of self begins to unravel. So your brain protects you. It hides the cracks, silences the contradictions, deletes the parts of reality that don't support your self-image. You forget the moments when you were cruel. You distort the reasons for your failures. You invent explanations for behaviors you can't justify. And then you move forward, untroubled. You tell yourself a version of your life that makes sense. Not because it's accurate, but because it's safe. But now imagine confronting the truth. Seeing all of it, undistorted, unfiltered, undeniable. Every mistake, every selfish act, every moment of cowardice or cruelty. Not framed as lessons, not softened by growth. Just there, ugly, unavoidable, real. Could you survive that? Could your ego hold itself together under that weight? Or would it crack, fracture, collapse entirely? You start to understand why the deletions happen, why the edits are necessary. You don't protect your ego because you're arrogant. You protect it because without it, you lose the thread of who you are. You need to believe in a story. You need to trust a version of yourself, even if that version is incomplete, even if it's wrong. And so you live inside a mind that is constantly reshaping reality, not to deceive, but to survive. You think of yourself as someone who values truth, but you only tolerate the truths that fit. The rest get pushed aside. The rest are rebranded as misunderstandings, exaggerations, accidents, moments taken out of context. You deny them gently, subtly, completely. And slowly, you become a stranger to your own past. You look back and you see someone reasonable, someone trying, someone good. Not because that's what happened, but because that's what you need to see. And every time you look, the image gets sharper, cleaner, more consistent, until you can't tell the difference anymore, until you forget that there ever was a difference. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. Not that your brain edits reality, but that you never notice it happening. You believe you've been honest with yourself, that you've faced hard truths, that you've grown because of it. But maybe what you've really done is swap out one version of the story for another. One that's just uncomfortable enough to feel honest, but still safe enough to protect your ego. Maybe the self you've been defending doesn't really exist. Maybe your brain has spent your entire life erasing the parts of you that don't fit the narrative. And maybe what you call growth is just a more elegant way of lying to yourself. A way of believing that the person you used to be no longer exists, so you don't have to confront the fact that in some ways you still are them. Maybe the truth isn't that you've changed. Maybe the truth is that you've just forgotten who you were. Would it be more merciful if the one who died was the person you loved most? You'd never say it out loud, but maybe you've thought it. Not because you want them to die, but because if someone has to, if it has to be one of you, you don't want to live with the weight of choosing someone else. And choosing them would mean you don't have to carry that weight. You picture them there, not in some abstract crowd, not one life among many, just them. Just the person whose voice you know in your sleep, whose habits are etched into your days, the person you'd never ever want to lose. And now someone tells you one of you must go. At first, you resist the thought. The instinct is immediate. Protect them. Of course, that's what love means. But then you think about what happens after. Not the moment of death. The moment after. When you're standing in the quiet, knowing it was your choice that kept them alive. Because saving someone isn't free. It demands something from you. If they live, then you were the reason someone else didn't. You chose them, and maybe that person you didn't choose had someone too. Someone who loved them the way you love this person. Someone who begged for them to be spared, but their voice wasn't loud enough. Yours was. Could you live with that? Could you look at the one you saved and not see the one you didn't? Could you ever hear their laughter again and not feel a quiet echo of the silence you created elsewhere? And so the question grows darker. What if the most loving thing you could do was let them go? Not because they deserve it, not because it's noble, but because you can't bear to let them become the reason someone else dies. It sounds backward, twisted, cruel, but it's the kind of cruelty that hides in every moral calculation. One life or another, one pain or another, and you start to see the outline of something you weren't prepared for. That love isn't just about protection. Sometimes it's about surrender. And what if they agreed? What if they said yes? What if they saw the same weight you did and chose to carry it so you wouldn't have to? Would you let them? Could you bear their kindness more than their death? You try to imagine it, their voice, steady, telling you it's okay, that they forgive you, that they want this. But part of you knows that's not what they'd say. They wouldn't make it easy. They'd beg you not to let go. They'd cry. They'd plead. Because they want to live too. And then you're back in the center of the dilemma. No escape. You have to choose. You them. Someone else. And suddenly none of the reasons feel pure anymore. You don't want them to die, but you also don't want to live with what it would mean if they didn't. So maybe the choice isn't about morality at all. Maybe it's just about what kind of pain you think you can survive. Watching them die, or watching them live, knowing someone else died instead. You try to find some kind of rule, something to make the decision objective, impersonal. But there is no rule. There's just your life, your love, your guilt, your private logic, your unbearable clarity. And if it came down to it, really, finally, what would you do? Would you choose them, knowing exactly what it costs? Would you sacrifice them, knowing exactly what that would do to you? Or would you stand frozen, praying for someone else to make the choice for you? Because maybe the truth is, you don't want to save them, and you don't want to lose them. You just want the weight to go away, and it never will. Not now, not after you've imagined this. Not after you've pictured their face at the center of a decision no one should ever have to make. Because the most unbearable thought isn't losing them. It's the possibility that deep down you might be willing to. Who do they love? Really? the person you are, or the version of you that lives inside their mind. You want to believe it's the former, that they see you, understand you, love you completely. But that belief is fragile. It depends on the assumption that you've been fully known, that nothing essential has been hidden, exaggerated, or misunderstood. But think about it carefully. How much of yourself do you truly show? How many times have you said what was expected, not what was true? How often have you adjusted your tone, softened your flaws, played up what others might admire? Maybe you think those were small things. Social survival, harmless. But over time, they build something else, a version of you that isn't quite false, but not quite real either. And it's that version people come to love, the version shaped by glimpses, suggestions, impressions. A curated character, carefully edited through years of small omissions and strategic disclosures. They don't know the full picture, they know the parts you've allowed them to see. Sometimes you feel comfort in this. You tell yourself it's still you, just a different angle. But in quieter moments, doubt creeps in. If they knew everything, would they still love you? If they saw the envy you try to ignore, the resentment you bury, the quiet desperation you pretend isn't there, if they heard the thoughts you dismiss as passing impulses, but secretly carry with you, if they knew your full capacity for bitterness, pettiness, cruelty, would anything be the same? You try not to dwell on this. You try to believe that love is strong enough to handle truth. But even that belief is based on a lie that you've ever really tested it. And maybe you already know the answer, because you've seen what happens when parts of the truth slip through. A bad moment, a regrettable reaction, something you wish you hadn't said. You watch the discomfort in their eyes, the subtle shift in tone. You feel the warmth recede. They say it's nothing, that everyone has bad days, but something changes. Not much, just enough. And that's when it hits you. They don't love you. They love the you they think you are. They love the consistency, the predictability, the version that comforts their own idea of who you are. When you deviate too far from that, they pull back. Not always consciously, but instinctively. They retreat from the discomfort of reality, because love, for many people, isn't unconditional. It's contingent on maintaining an illusion. And it goes deeper than just romantic love or friendship. It's everywhere. Social acceptance, professional respect, even admiration from strangers. All of it tied to a version of you that doesn't quite exist. So now you're stuck. If you show more of yourself, you risk breaking the illusion. If you keep hiding, you deepen the distance between who you are and who they love. Either way, you lose something. And what does that do to your sense of self? When you start to wonder if you're loved at all, or just performing a character that earns love. When even your most intimate moments feel tainted by performance. When even the compliments you receive feel like praise for someone else. You might try to push past this. Tell yourself that everyone does it, that this is just how relationships work. But deep down, you know there's something hollow about it. Something quietly devastating about being loved for something that doesn't feel fully real. You start to crave authenticity, but you don't know where to find it anymore. You wonder what it would be like to be fully seen and still loved. But the risk of rejection feels too high, the threat of abandonment too sharp, so you keep performing, you keep adjusting, you keep feeding the version of you that others expect, and starving the one that doesn't fit. And maybe the worst part isn't that people love a false version of you, it's that you're starting to love that version too. Imagine you're 14 years old, you're clever, charming, a little too quick with words. You tell a lie, something small, A fake excuse, a twisted version of the truth, something to protect yourself or get out of trouble. It works. No one questions you. No one even suspects. You feel a quiet thrill, not just relief, power. You realize something. The world is soft when you speak confidently. You can shape it, nudge it, tilt it, just enough that people stop noticing what's real and start following your version instead. So you keep doing it. Not all the time, just when it matters. When the truth would hurt, or slow you down, or make you vulnerable. The lies aren't malicious. Not at first. They're clever, helpful even. They make things easier for everyone, especially you. And slowly, the reward grows. You're trusted more, given more opportunities. People confide in you. They admire your charm, your intuition, your ability to read the room. They don't see the adjustments you've made, the truths you've bent. All they see is someone who always seems to say the right thing at the right time. Eventually, you lie without thinking. It becomes reflexive, automatic. You don't feel guilt. You feel control. And the better you get at it, the more the world opens up. But something else happens too. Quietly, without warning, you start to forget which parts of your life are real, which conversations were honest, which relationships were built on truth, and which were built on your performance. People laugh at your jokes, open up to you, trust you, but they're not reacting to who you are. They're reacting to the version you showed them, the one you designed. And now you're alone with a growing question. If everyone loves a version of you that isn't fully real, are you loved at all? You might try to stop, to be honest. Raw, transparent. But the world doesn't reward honesty the way it rewards precision. Lies are sharp, effective. Honesty is slow, messy, easily misunderstood. You say what's real, and people flinch. They pull away. They don't want your truth. They want the comfortable story you used to give them. So you lie again. Not because you're evil, not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you've learned something deeply practical. The truth is rarely useful, and still the rewards come. Promotions, admiration, influence. People describe you as persuasive, confident, visionary. But those are just softer words for what you're really doing. You're manipulating, and you're rewarded for it. In some systems, this becomes a skill set. Entire careers are built on selective truth. Sales, politics, entertainment, even therapy sometimes. Say what people want to hear, frame the message, control the response. Lying isn't just tolerated, it's essential. But over time, the consequences accumulate. You start to feel numb, disconnected, like your life is a performance, and you're no longer sure where the act ends. People believe in you, but you don't. You watch yourself speak in meetings, comfort friends, deliver perfect lines, and inside, you're silent, detached, unreachable. Because when you always lie, even when it works, something breaks. Not suddenly, not dramatically, quietly, like a muscle wasting away from disuse. You begin to realize that you haven't told the truth in months, maybe years. Not a full truth, not an unfiltered thought. Everything you say is shaped, calculated, filtered through your need to stay liked, respected, untouchable. And worst of all, it works. You are exactly who the world wants you to be, and you know it's not real. Eventually you start to wonder if you can lie so easily, so effectively, how many others can too. How many people around you are doing the same thing, smiling, nodding, pretending? How much of your life is built on mutual deception? And if you stopped lying, if you broke the spell, what would be left? Would anyone stay? Would anyone recognize you? Would you even recognize yourself? But you don't stop. Because by now, the lie isn't just a tool, it's your identity. The person you became to succeed is the person everyone expects you to be. Tearing that down would mean starting over. It would mean failure, vulnerability, rejection. So you tell one more lie, and then another. Not because you enjoy it anymore, but because it's the only language you remember how to speak. And slowly you start to understand, the better you are at lying, the more you're rewarded. But the better you are at lying, the less of you there is left to reward. Imagine someone you love, trapped in a burning building. The flames are climbing fast. Smoke is pouring through the walls. You're outside, helpless, watching. Suddenly, a man runs past you, straight into the fire. He doesn't hesitate, doesn't ask questions. Minutes later, he stumbles back out, carrying 3 people, alive, coughing, terrified, but alive. He saves them, then disappears. Later, you find out the truth. That man was a diagnosed psychopath. No empathy, no guilt, no fear. His brain doesn't respond to pain the way yours does. He didn't run into the fire because he cared. He did it because he wanted to see what it felt like. He wanted the thrill, the sensation, the data. And that's not the only time. Over the past 10 years, he's saved more than 30 people, dragging strangers from car wrecks, volunteering for high-risk surgeries, walking unarmed into hostage situations. Every time he succeeded. Every time someone lived because of him. And yet he feels nothing. No gratitude, no pride, just calm interest. Maybe mild satisfaction. He doesn't even remember their names. You want to feel disgust, but you hesitate because he saved lives. More than most people ever will. More than your favorite hero, your childhood idol, your beloved activist. He didn't do it out of kindness. He didn't care about anyone. But he acted when others froze. He moved when others ran. So what does that make him? You start asking questions you don't want to ask. Is morality about feeling the right thing or doing the right thing? Would you rather be saved by someone who loves you or someone who simply knows exactly what needs to be done? Is it better to be cared for ineffectively or rescued indifferently? What if a person with no conscience makes more ethical decisions than someone driven by compassion? What if cold calculation leads to more good than warm intention ever could? You think about the people who stood by and watched, the ones who cried, who shouted, who wanted to help but couldn't bring themselves to act. Their empathy froze them. Their morality paralyzed them. They were too human to save anyone. But he wasn't. You begin to wonder how many lives are lost every day because good people hesitate, because they wait, agonize, second guess, because they can't act without moral clarity, emotional certainty, or permission, because they're more afraid of doing harm than failing to do good. He isn't afraid. There's no emotional burden, no doubt, just action. Results, lives pulled back from the edge. But what does that mean for the rest of us? Are we noble or just slow? If a psychopath saves a life without care and you fail to save one because you care too much, who's the better person? Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe there's no virtue in motive at all. Maybe what matters is the outcome, the impact, the fact that someone lived who otherwise would have died. And maybe you don't like that, because it means all your feelings, your empathy, your intentions, they aren't enough. It means goodness isn't what you feel, it's what you do, and you haven't done enough. You start thinking about the word hero. How much of it is image? How much is narrative, personality, appearance? Would you ever call this man a hero? Would you give him a medal, a parade, a plaque with his name on it? Or would you hide him? Keep the truth quiet. Pretend someone else did it, because the truth is uncomfortable. It tells you that the brain you fear, the one that feels nothing, may be better suited for courage than yours. It tells you that empathy doesn't guarantee goodness, that sometimes the absence of fear looks exactly like bravery. It makes you question every story you've ever believed about what it means to be good, what it means to be human. And maybe that's the real horror. Not that a psychopath saved more lives than your hero, but that you wouldn't have. That if you'd been there, in the fire, at the wreck, beside the hostage, you might have watched, might have waited, might have done nothing at all, and he did. Who taught you how to be? Not when you were 7 or 15. Before that. Before words, before memory, before choice, before you could even understand what teaching was. When you were still learning how to recognize a face, someone had already decided which faces would smile at you, which voices would soothe you, which patterns of touch and tone and presence would tell your body what safety feels like. You didn't choose those first impressions. You absorbed them, quietly, automatically. They shaped what you expect from the world, what you believe love feels like, what you think pain means, what kind of attention makes you feel whole, not because you reasoned through it, but because your nervous system was sculpted by the environment it was dropped into. And once that shaping begins, it never really stops. By the time you could form sentences, you were already built. Your instincts, your fears, your longings, they were all primed by hands you don't remember. And those hands didn't need to be cruel to do damage. They just had to be inconsistent, or cold, or too controlling, or too absent. Because it's not just what happened to you, it's what didn't. The touch that wasn't given, the safety that wasn't there, the attunement that never arrived. These gaps are not neutral. They form the blueprint your adult self will use to search for comfort without ever knowing where the template came from. Later, when you choose friends, lovers, jobs, goals, it will all feel like freedom, like decisions made by a conscious self. But what if most of those decisions are just echoes? Not original choices, but repetitions of patterns set long before you had words for them. The ones who comfort you most may feel familiar, not because they are good for you, but because they resemble the early impressions your nervous system learned to depend on. Even if those impressions were unreliable, or chaotic, or quietly punishing. The body doesn't search for what's healthy, it searches for what's known. But what's known is what was taught to you silently, before you could speak, before you could even know you were learning. So now you move through the world thinking you're making choices. But are you? Or are you reenacting a script someone else wrote into your nervous system? A script that rewards you for abandoning parts of yourself, that punishes you for being too loud, too needy, too angry, too real. This isn't your fault, but it is your inheritance. And like most inheritances, it comes with chains. You wonder why you stay in places that hurt you, why you repeat patterns that exhaust you, why the same emptiness returns, even after new beginnings. But maybe it's because part of you doesn't recognize comfort unless it's laced with pain, doesn't feel loved unless it's earned through silence, doesn't feel worthy unless it's proving something constantly. And if that's true, then how much of your personality is actually survival? How much of your identity is just adaptation? A performance refined so early, you forgot it was ever a performance at all. You learned it before you could speak. And now, you call it you. But what if it's not? What if it's just what was handed to you, carefully, unconsciously, persistently, by people who were also shaped before they could speak? There is no clean place to start the story, no moment of origin that wasn't already touched by something older. Every generation inherits a nervous system conditioned by the one before it. Every childhood begins under the weight of unresolved histories. And even as you grow, reflect, heal, that early conditioning doesn't disappear. It lives in your reactions, in the way you flinch when someone gets too close, in the way you chase validation from people who withhold it, in the way you mistrust calm or sabotage rest, or feel safest when you're striving, fixing, pleasing. So if you want to know who you are, you can't just look at your thoughts. You have to look at what your body expects, what it braces for, what it believes love will cost. And you have to ask, who gave you those beliefs? Because until you see how deeply you were shaped, you'll keep mistaking your patterns for your personality. You'll keep blaming yourself for outcomes you were trained to create. You'll keep trying to fix your life without ever questioning the blueprint. But the most disturbing part isn't that someone else built your foundation. It's that they did it gently, silently, before you even knew you had a choice. Then maybe that's what manipulation really is, not coercion or deception, but quiet shaping, done so early and so thoroughly that you forget you were ever free. Would you torture a child if it meant saving someone you love? Not for revenge, not for punishment, just one purpose: to make someone else live. Maybe your partner, maybe your child, maybe someone innocent, dying from something only pain can cure. You think about the horror immediately. You imagine yourself saying no, absolutely not. You tell yourself there has to be another way. But then you realize something strange. The moment you imagined someone you love dying, your certainty weakened. You wouldn't do it for a stranger. Maybe not even for yourself, but for them. Now you're in the room. It's quiet. The child is scared, crying. They don't understand what's happening. You know that every second you wait, someone you love is slipping away, and there is no one else to do it. No one to blame, no one to stop you. You hesitate, not because it's wrong, but because you still believe there's a line you wouldn't cross. You still think there's a version of yourself that's too decent, too moral, too compassionate. But what if your compassion is the problem? What if empathy isn't what holds us back from evil, but what drives us toward it? When you see someone suffer, you want to stop it. That's normal. But when the suffering becomes personal, when the person in pain is someone you love, empathy starts to twist. You stop thinking clearly. You stop caring about balance. You stop seeing other people as real. You focus all your care into one place, one face, one life. And suddenly, anything feels justified. You would lie, you would steal, you would hurt people who have done nothing wrong. And in your mind, you wouldn't feel evil. You'd feel love. And this is where it becomes dangerous. Because once you believe your actions are born from empathy, from care, from deep emotional connection, it becomes nearly impossible to see yourself as cruel. You could destroy someone's life and still believe you're the good one. This is what makes empathy so dangerous. It's selective. It's tribal. It doesn't scale. And the more you care about someone, the more you're willing to do for them, even if it means hurting others. Think about history. About people who committed atrocities, not out of hatred, but out of loyalty. Soldiers who killed for their country. Parents who harmed others to protect their children. Entire societies that turned violent, not because they stopped caring, but because they cared too much about their own group. Empathy didn't stop them. It helped them justify everything. You might think empathy always leads to kindness. But that only works when everyone is safe. When no one you love is at risk. When you're not forced to choose between who lives and who dies. But when you're in the middle of a crisis, when you're desperate, afraid, and staring into the face of someone you can't bear to lose. Empathy narrows your vision. You don't think about the consequences. You don't think about the other side. You only think, I need to protect them. And suddenly, anything becomes acceptable. That's how it starts. One small compromise, one rationalization, one belief that your pain, your love, justifies what you're about to do. And when it's over, you won't see yourself as a monster. You'll see yourself as someone who loved too deeply. That's the trap. Empathy doesn't just make us kind, it makes us dangerous. Because once we believe that caring deeply makes us good, we stop questioning what we're willing to do for the people we care about. And maybe the worst part isn't that empathy can lead to cruelty. Maybe the worst part is how right it feels when it does. He confessed, crying, shaking, exhausted. After hours of questioning, after being told he failed a polygraph, after being shown fake evidence, he broke down and said the words they were waiting to hear, but he didn't do it. He wasn't even there, and no one remembers how long it took before someone finally noticed the inconsistencies, or how many lives were destroyed before the truth came out. False confessions aren't rare, they're common, disturbingly common. And the reason isn't always coercion or manipulation. Sometimes people confess just to make the pain stop, to end the hours of interrogation, to finally go home, even if they know they won't. It doesn't feel logical. Why would anyone admit to something they didn't do? Especially something terrible. Murder, assault, crimes that carry sentences that never end. But logic doesn't matter when you're trapped in a small room, under harsh lights, with no control over your time, your body, your future. You tell yourself you'd never do that. You'd hold out. You'd fight for the truth. But you don't understand how fast your mind can unravel under pressure. You don't realize how quickly certainty turns to doubt when the people across the table insist, over and over, that they know you're guilty. They wear you down. Not with violence, but with suggestion, with repetition, with silence. They show you evidence that doesn't exist. They tell you someone else blamed you. They suggest maybe you blacked out. Maybe you don't remember. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe you didn't mean to. And something inside you starts to crack. You want it to end. You want the pressure to stop. You start to believe that if you just say what they want, it will be over. You'll explain everything later. You'll fix it once you get a lawyer, a judge, someone who will listen. But no one does. Because once you confess, everything changes. The investigation stops. Doubts disappear. People who were unsure now say they always knew. Every fact gets reinterpreted to fit your admission. The system doesn't search for truth. After a confession, it builds a case to support it. Even when the evidence contradicts it. Even when there's no physical proof. Even when you immediately recant. Because to the system, a confession is a conclusion, not a clue. It becomes the story everyone believes, even when the story makes no sense. And what scares you most isn't just the idea that others might confess to things they didn't do. It's the creeping realization that you might too. That under the right pressure, in the wrong moment, you might trade your freedom for relief. That your certainty about yourself is weaker than you think. You might believe you're strong. That you know what you did, what you didn't do, what you'd never say. But that belief depends on circumstances, on safety, on support. Take those away, isolate you, exhaust you, manipulate you, and everything changes. You'd tell yourself it's temporary. You'd explain it later. But the justice system doesn't care about the moments after. It only remembers the moment you broke. And the people around you, they believe the confession, not because they're cruel, but because it's easier. It fits the narrative. It resolves uncertainty. It gives them someone to blame, someone to punish, someone to forget. You become the symbol of closure, even if you're innocent. And once you're inside the system, innocence becomes irrelevant. The confession overshadows everything. Appeals are denied. Evidence is dismissed. No one wants to believe the story was wrong from the beginning, that the person they convicted never should have been there. So you sit in silence. Years pass, and maybe if you're lucky, someone takes another look. Finds a piece of DNA, hears another confession, discovers the lie. But by then, the damage is done. The years are gone. And even when you're freed, the shadow stays. People still wonder, still doubt, still think, if he didn't do it, why did he say he did? But the real question isn't why innocent people confess. It's why we keep believing them. What if you could remember something you never lived? You can feel the air, the temperature of the room, the smell of wood polish or coffee or blood. The moment has weight, texture, presence. You can describe it in detail. You can almost reach out and touch it, but it didn't happen. It never happened. You're certain you remember it. You know how you felt. You know what you said. You can picture the way someone looked at you, the sound of their voice, the way your heart beat faster or slower or broke completely. But there is no trace of this moment in the real world. No evidence, no witness, no record. And if you dig hard enough, you'll find cracks, small inconsistencies, pieces that don't quite fit. And yet, the memory stays, just as strong, just as real. It's not a glitch. It's not a hallucination. It's something deeper. Your brain has rewritten history and handed you a story to believe, and you do. Maybe it was implanted intentionally, a therapist helping you cope, a friend filling in the blanks, a suggestion repeated enough times until your brain shaped it into something solid. Or maybe it was unintentional. A photo misremembered, a dream mistaken for truth, a story you told yourself to survive, something too painful to face directly. Now the memory is part of you, not just a story in your head, but a piece of your identity. It shapes the way you understand yourself, your past, your relationships, your trauma, your worth. A single memory, never real, holding together everything you believe about who you are. Would you want to know, if you had the chance to uncover the truth, to find out which of your memories are real and which are false, would you take it? Or would the risk be too great? Because even if the truth comes to light, the damage is already done. You can't just delete a memory. You can't remove the emotional weight it carried. The fear, the grief, the guilt, they linger, even when the story that caused them disappears. Maybe that's the most disturbing part. Your body doesn't know the difference. It reacts the same way. It builds patterns around the pain, even if the pain came from a lie. You develop fears, habits, protective instincts, all based on events that never occurred, and those patterns persist. They control your life, your choices, your relationships. You might push people away, afraid they'll hurt you in a way no one ever actually did. You might chase redemption for something you never caused. You might carry shame that belongs to no one. What if someone wanted to use this? What if memory could be edited deliberately, systematically, with precision? A person could be made to remember a crime they didn't commit, a betrayal that never occurred, a childhood that never happened. Their emotions would follow, their behavior would change, their personality would shift, and they would never suspect. Because when a memory feels real, it becomes real. And that reality isn't something you can simply reason your way out of. It becomes a framework, a foundation. What does that mean for justice, for therapy, for trust? If you can't trust your own memory, then who can you be certain of? You could destroy someone by altering a single moment in their mind, a moment that never happened, but feels truer than anything else. A false memory doesn't have to be violent or extreme. It just has to be small, plausible, persistent. A look that wasn't there, the word that was never said, a feeling that doesn't belong. Over time, the brain fills in the blanks, and eventually There are no blanks left, only certainty. Now consider this. Maybe it's already happened. Maybe you already have one memory like this, or several. Something you believe about your past that isn't true. Something that shaped your life, your fears, your identity. You wouldn't know, you wouldn't feel doubt, you'd defend it, like any other part of your history. Because it's not just a story, it's you. And if that's true, how much of you is built on fiction? What happens if the truth finally comes out, and the memory unravels? Do you lose part of yourself? Do you change? Or does the ghost of that memory stay inside you, continuing to influence everything, even though it's been proven false? Some lies live longer than facts. Sometimes the only thing scarier than not remembering is remembering something that never happened and realizing too late that it changed everything. Imagine a man who never hesitates. He doesn't question orders, doesn't wonder if the mission makes sense, doesn't flinch when asked to kill. His actions are immediate, precise, and efficient. He doesn't get lost in doubts or paralyzed by ethics. He moves forward because he was trained to move forward. He is the perfect soldier. But then pause. What does perfect mean? Does it mean obedient, relentless, loyal to command above all else? Or does it mean something worse, someone who has let go of the part of himself that asks why? At first, that seems useful. A soldier who doesn't hesitate can be trusted to act quickly in crisis, to follow strategy without undermining it, to carry out plans without becoming tangled in emotion. War, after all, is messy enough. There's no room for hesitation, no time for internal debate. But if he doesn't ask why, then what else doesn't he ask? Does he ask who the enemy really is? Does he wonder what happens to the civilians caught in the crossfire? Does he stop to think about the meaning of the orders he's given, or whether the people who gave them are right? Or is that the point? Because a soldier who doesn't ask why becomes easier to use. He becomes a tool, an extension of someone else's will. His strength isn't his own, it's borrowed authority. And when that authority becomes corrupted, his obedience becomes dangerous. He can carry out atrocities without flinching, without the psychological weight of moral responsibility, because he was just following orders, because he didn't ask why. You might think this kind of soldier is rare, but is he? Think about how institutions train people. Think about what boot camp is for. It breaks you down. It teaches you not to question. It replaces your internal compass with a chain of command. And then it praises you when you stop hesitating. But what happens when a person no longer feels the need to understand their actions? What happens when violence becomes procedural? When killing becomes mechanical? A perfect soldier might be calm, focused, loyal, but he also becomes numb, not because he's evil, but because feeling too much would interfere with function. He can't afford empathy. Empathy would make him hesitate. Empathy would make him ask why. So he turns it off. That part of his mind that reflects, that doubts, that feels. And once that part is gone, what's left? A person who still looks human, still speaks, still eats, still laughs, maybe. But inside, something is missing. Not broken. Removed. And now think about the people who command him. What kind of person seeks out this level of control over others? What kind of person builds systems where asking why is a weakness? Maybe they don't want soldiers. Maybe they want weapons that breathe. Weapons that walk and speak and shoot. Weapons that carry out policy, strategy, destruction. Not because they believe in it, but because they don't stop to question it. And that sounds horrifying when you put it that way. But how different is it, really, from other parts of life? In school, you follow the rules without questioning them. In work, you complete tasks even when they feel pointless or wrong. In families, in religion, in government, obedience is often rewarded more than thought. We live surrounded by structures that prefer quiet compliance to active inquiry. So maybe the perfect soldier isn't a product of war. Maybe he's just the purest result of a deeper instinct to be good by doing what you're told. But then the question shifts. What happens when the war ends? What does the perfect soldier become when there's no more enemy, no more orders? Does he learn to ask again? Or is that ability gone forever? You might want to believe that it can be restored, that the part of him that once wondered, doubted, hesitated, that it can come back. But what if it can't? What if the silence inside him is permanent? What if he no longer remembers how to think without permission? And if that's true for him, what about you? How often do you follow rules without thinking? How often do you avoid asking why, not because you agree, but because it's easier? Maybe the perfect soldier isn't someone else. Maybe it's a version of you, waiting quietly, just beneath the surface. Who are you when no one around you sees you clearly? Not who you think you are, not who you hope to be, but who you become in a crowd, surrounded by voices, opinions, gestures, reflections that don't belong to you, but feel like they do. When people look at you, they're not seeing you, they're seeing what they need, what they fear, what they want to believe, and you respond to it. Not consciously, not with intent, but slowly, subtly, you become the version of yourself they already expect. In isolation, you might believe you're fixed, a stable identity, a core self, but then you enter a room, and without realizing it, your posture shifts, your tone adjusts, your silence grows heavier or lighter, depending on who's speaking. You laugh, more or less. You emphasize different truths. You leave certain thoughts unspoken. Why? Because you're not just reacting to others, you're reflecting them, echoing what they project, contorting to fit an invisible mold that was shaped long before you arrived. You've done this for years, maybe your whole life. You've walked into groups and felt your personality stretch or shrink. Sometimes you become more agreeable, sometimes more distant, sometimes more confident, more insecure, more intelligent, more lost. But none of those are choices, they're reflexes, instincts, survival mechanisms, refined through subtle feedback loops. You show more of yourself when it's safe. You hide when it's not. You test people, lightly, quietly, offering versions of yourself in pieces, gauging their response, adjusting, withholding, until you find the version they seem to like, and that becomes you, for now. But it's not that simple, because each person you know holds a different version of you in their mind, not just in memory, but in expectation. Some see you as fragile, and you respond by becoming smaller. Some see you as capable, and you rise to meet it. Some see you as cold, and so you offer them silence. And slowly, without permission, without realizing it, these fractured images begin to dictate your internal life. The crowd doesn't have to be large. Sometimes it's just one person, one glance, one assumption, and you adjust, not out of deception, but out of something deeper. The need to belong, to be mirrored, to be understood, even if only through illusion. And this is the trap. Because over time, your real self, the one without reflection, fades. You don't know if your opinion is truly yours, or if it's just a safe synthesis of what others have voiced. You don't know if you actually enjoy what you claim to love, or if you've merely learned to smile at the right cues. You can't tell if your kindness is genuine or just a well-rehearsed defense against conflict. Your identity becomes something reactive. a sum of echoes. And worse, this behavior is rewarded. People like you more when you reflect what they already believe. They trust you when you reinforce their own worldview. The more you mirror, the more you're accepted, and so you continue. Because being seen, even inaccurately, feels better than being invisible. But what's left when the crowd disappears? When there's no one to mirror, no assumptions to play off, no expectations to contort around? Do you feel peace, or do you feel empty? Most people imagine solitude as clarity, a return to authenticity. But often what they feel is loss, confusion, a collapse of identity, because their sense of self was never rooted in solitude. It was stitched together from hundreds of social fragments. Now, with no one to reflect, they don't know how to stand on their own. You might think this doesn't apply to you, that your personality is too strong, too independent. But strength doesn't protect against reflection. Sometimes it amplifies it. You resist most in the places you feel most watched. You push back hardest in rooms that remind you of past versions you hated. Even your rebellion is a response. And here's where it gets more unsettling. The people around you, they don't know they're doing this to you. They don't see their gaze as shaping you. They think they're simply observing. They think the version of you they hold in their mind is objective, accurate, earned. But it never is. It's projection, filtered through their fears, their wounds, their desires. And when enough of them agree on a version of you, even silently, you begin to believe it. And then you're trapped, because now you feel responsible for maintaining their image of you. Changing would mean conflict, confusion, maybe even rejection. And so you preserve it, even when it hurts you, even when it feels false, because disrupting their version of you feels more dangerous than living inside it. You smile a little more than you want to. You stay silent a little longer than you should. You become a reflection of their comfort, not your own truth, and it gets harder to tell the difference. So now ask yourself this: who are you when no one's watching? Not in theory, but in sensation, in breath, in thought. When the reflections fade and the feedback loops dissolve, do you still feel real, or are you just a mirror, waiting for someone else to stand in front of you again? What if I told you that most people would rather electrocute themselves than sit in silence for 15 minutes? Not theoretically. Actually, a real physical shock, painful, unnecessary, and entirely avoidable. And yet, when given the choice between discomfort and boredom, people chose the pain. At first, that sounds absurd. You think of yourself sitting quietly, maybe in a chair, maybe alone in your room. Nothing to do, nothing to look at. Just silence. Just you, with your thoughts. It doesn't seem like it would be that difficult. But the longer you picture it, the more it starts to change. The silence begins to stretch. You check the time, but there is no clock. You start to feel the shape of your mind, turning inward, and it makes you uneasy. Your thoughts begin to loop. There's nowhere to go, and nothing to distract you. Just you. That's when the discomfort begins. Not physical, existential, a kind of crawling in the mind, a resistance to stillness. You start to reach for something, anything, to interrupt the quiet. A phone, a screen, a sound, a snack, a task. You reach for the shock. In the experiment, they placed a button on the table. Press it, and receive a mild electric shock. Every participant had tested it beforehand. They all agreed it was unpleasant. Some even paid money to avoid it. But when left alone with nothing else to do, many of them pressed it. Some more than once, some up to 15 times. Not because they liked the pain, but because they feared the stillness. It wasn't a flaw in the experiment. It wasn't about curiosity or boredom in the shallow sense. It was about something deeper, a fear of what we find when we're left alone with our thoughts. Not dramatic thoughts, just ordinary ones. Anxieties, regrets, longings, thoughts we push away all day without realizing. We live in a world built to keep us from noticing. Every space filled with noise, light, movement. Everything fast, everything new, everything urgent. There's almost always something to scroll, something to check, something to plan. And that's not an accident. It's not just convenience, it's a defense. A defense against the moment when you finally run out of things to consume and are forced to sit in the quiet with the truth of who you are. We've trained ourselves to escape that moment at any cost, to avoid reflection, even when reflection is the only way forward. Because the alternative is unsettling. It's looking inward and seeing things you don't like. How far behind you've fallen, how disappointed you are, how afraid, how alone. And even when there's nothing dramatic to discover, there's still discomfort. The human mind wasn't built for stillness. It craves distraction not just as a preference, but as a form of survival. Because silence invites vulnerability. It leaves space for shame, for confusion, for the painful realization that you don't know who you are when you aren't performing, producing, or pleasing. The shock becomes a symbol, not just of pain, but of our threshold. How far we'll go to avoid facing ourselves. Because pain is at least familiar, at least distracting. It gives the mind something to do, somewhere to go, something to feel other than nothing. And maybe that's the deeper fear, not pain, but nothingness. The void, the emptiness behind our curated lives. The terrifying possibility that when the noise stops, there might be nothing underneath. So we fill every moment. We avoid waiting. We fear boredom. We mistake rest for laziness and silence for failure. And when left alone, truly alone, we reach for the shock, not because we're weak, but because we're unpracticed. We've forgotten how to sit with discomfort, how to let the silence settle without filling it, how to let the mind unfold without interference, how to be still and not panic. Because being alone with your thoughts isn't just hard, it's revealing. And what it reveals, more than anything else, is how little control you have over the contents of your own mind. How quickly thoughts arise, unbidden, uninvited. How many of them are sad, or shallow, or cruel. And how rarely you are the one choosing them. The shock becomes a way to escape that truth. A way to say, I may not like what I find in here, but I can make it stop. I can interrupt the spiral. I can feel something I understand. But what if you didn't? What if you sat through it? What if you let the silence grow and the discomfort deepen and the thoughts unfold all the way to the end? What if you stayed in the room, not for 15 minutes, but for as long as it takes for the mind to stop grasping for something outside itself? What would you find? And could you bear it? Because maybe the most disturbing part isn't that people shock themselves to avoid silence. Maybe it's that you understand exactly why they did. Are you sure they're laughing with you? You hear the sound, short, sharp bursts of air, maybe a pitch too high, maybe held a little too long. There's a smile, teeth showing, a hand on the chest or the table, but you don't really know what it means. You assume it means they're amused, that they're pleased, that you're safe. But you don't actually know, because laughter is one of the easiest lies to tell. It's harder to fake a scream or grief. But laughter can hide disgust. It can camouflage mockery, contempt, resentment. You've laughed before when you didn't feel like it. Maybe to be polite. Maybe to fit in. Maybe to avoid confrontation. Sometimes you've done it to keep someone else from feeling embarrassed. And sometimes you've done it to humiliate them more quietly. That's the thing about laughter. It doesn't belong to the one who hears it. It belongs to the one who makes it. And they can mean anything by it. You probably think you'd know the difference. You tell yourself you can hear sincerity. You trust your instincts, your ability to read people. But the truth is, your brain is wired to assume the best, to believe the signals you see. You're built to want inclusion, to avoid conflict. So when someone laughs, you almost never question it. You want to believe it's real, but the uncertainty is always there, just under the surface. A slight delay before they start. A look that doesn't quite match. A shift in tone. Something you notice, but don't want to. Something that makes you wonder, just for a moment, if the laughter was meant to comfort you or to expose you. There's no way to ask. You can't turn to someone and say, "Was that real?" Because if it was, you'll seem paranoid. And if it wasn't, they'll lie anyway. They'll tell you of course it was real. And they'll smile, and maybe laugh again, and you'll be no closer to knowing the truth. Some people spend their whole lives doubting laughter. They replay it in their heads, over and over, trying to decode it. Was it genuine? Was it cruel? Was it forced? Every laugh becomes a puzzle they can't solve. And every time they think they've found the answer, another laugh comes along that makes them question everything again. This uncertainty doesn't just stay in social situations. It spreads. If you can't trust someone's laugh, can you trust their praise, their love, their sympathy? You start to see every emotional expression as something possibly false, a performance, a mask. You begin to feel like everyone's faking something, and you just can't prove it. And then it turns inward. You start to wonder about your own laughter. Was it real? Were you really amused? Or were you just responding automatically, filling silence, avoiding discomfort? You laugh at a joke and suddenly question whether you even found it funny or if you just wanted to seem normal. The more you think about it, the less certain you become. Your own face, your own voice, your own responses begin to feel alien, programmed, performed. Because laughter is contagious, but it's also manipulative. It can shape group dynamics. It can exclude, mock, punish. A single well-timed laugh can isolate someone completely. And that's the part no one wants to admit. How powerful laughter is, how dangerous it can be when it's used as a weapon. You've seen it happen. Someone makes a mistake, says something awkward, reveals something too personal. And then someone laughs, not with them, but at them. Others join in, and the person who made the mistake, they laugh too. Because not laughing would make it worse. Because laughing is the only way to survive it. That's what's most disturbing. Sometimes, laughter becomes self-defense. A shield you raise when you're being torn apart. You laugh to signal that you're fine, that it doesn't hurt, that you're not crumbling inside. And everyone sees the laugh and believes it. Because it's easier to believe. It's not just others you're protecting from the truth. It's yourself. You laugh so you don't have to feel what's really there. Embarrassment, rage, grief. You replace it with a sound that makes everyone, including you, feel like things are okay. But if you've ever broken down after laughing, if you've ever felt hollow afterward, then you already know. You already know how fragile the whole thing is. And you start to understand something else. That sometimes the most painful experiences are followed by laughter, not because they're funny, but because the body doesn't know what else to do. Because the line between relief and despair is so thin it breaks under pressure. And what comes out is a sound you call laughter. But it's not joy, it's surrender. So now, when someone laughs, you pause, not because you know what it means, but because you know you don't. And when you laugh, you're no longer sure who it's for. Have you ever met someone who seemed perfectly sane, but they were in a psychiatric hospital? Not delusional, not violent, not detached from reality, just calm, coherent, thoughtful, and yet they're locked away, treated, observed, sedated. You're told they're sick, but when they speak, they make more sense than most people you know. You try to reconcile this contradiction. If someone sounds sane, acts sane, thinks clearly, why are they here? The explanations feel thin. Diagnoses written in charts. Diagnoses written in charts. Medical language designed to distance, to explain away discomfort. But something about this person lingers with you. You wonder, quietly, if the problem isn't them. Maybe the real issue is what they believe. Maybe it's not how they think, but what they think about. Maybe it's the questions they ask, the things they refuse to accept. What if the reason they're locked up is because they no longer play along? Think about it. Imagine someone who sees through the masks people wear every day, who questions why we pretend to be happy, why we obey rules that don't make sense, why we chase things we don't need and call that success. Imagine someone who refuses to lie about how empty all of it feels, who says what everyone else is too afraid to say, that the world feels broken, hollow, absurd. Now imagine that person isn't angry or unstable, they're just honest. Too honest. So honest that being around them makes others uncomfortable because their clarity is contagious. Their questions are unsettling. Their refusal to pretend becomes a threat. And so they're removed, not violently, not cruelly, just quietly. For their own good, of course, for the safety of others, given a label, given medication, given a room where their thoughts can be contained. You're told they need help, but you wonder, what if they're just refusing to lie? What if their so-called illness is actually a kind of clarity? What if what we call sanity is just the ability to conform, to adapt, to perform, to blend in, to pretend you don't see what's wrong, to laugh at things that aren't funny, to smile when you feel empty, to keep going, even when it makes no sense? What if real sanity, true awareness is unbearable? What if most people survive by dulling their minds, by filtering reality into something safer, softer, easier to manage? And what if the people who can't do that, the ones who see too much, feel too deeply, think too clearly, are the ones we lock away? It's a disturbing thought that the criteria for madness might not be internal chaos, but external defiance. That the system doesn't ask, "Are you thinking clearly?" It asks, "Are you saying the right things? Are you compliant? Are you manageable? Are you normal enough not to cause trouble?" And the more you think about it, the more the lines blur. You look around at the world outside, people working jobs they hate, numbing themselves with screens and substances, pretending to be okay while slowly unraveling. You wonder, are they the sane ones, or are they just better at hiding the symptoms? Now go back to that person in the hospital, the one who made too much sense. Maybe they cracked, not because they were weak, but because they refused to be numb, because they chose not to lie, because they looked at life without filters and couldn't pretend it was fine. Maybe they asked the questions you're too afraid to ask. Maybe they saw the emptiness beneath the surface and couldn't ignore it. Maybe they spoke the truth too clearly, too often, in a world that punishes truth. And maybe that's the real reason they're locked away, not because they lost touch with reality, but because they found it. You think of yourself as good, not perfect, not flawless, but decent, capable of doing harm, sure, but not the kind of harm that leaves real scars, not the kind that changes someone. You believe that's not who you are. But maybe that belief isn't based on anything true. Maybe it's just that you've never had to prove it wrong. There are things you've never done, not because you've chosen not to, but because you've never had the chance. The opportunity never came. The conditions were never right, or the pressure was never high enough. That's not morality. That's absence. You call yourself innocent. But what if innocence is just the name we give to the space before exposure? What if everything you think you'd never do is only sleeping inside you, waiting? You've never stolen because you've never needed to, never lied to save yourself from ruin, never hurt someone out of panic, or survival, or quiet revenge. But if the right pressure built up, if the right door opened, could you be so sure you'd stay the same? It's easy to feel virtuous when the worst parts of you have never been tested. Think of the people you judge, the ones who've done things you believe you never would. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're stronger, more grounded, more principled. Or maybe the only difference is that their test came early and yours hasn't come yet. You tell yourself that under pressure you'd do the right thing. But how do you know? You imagine yourself calm, rational, controlled. But that's just a guess. You've never had your world collapse in seconds. Never had your instincts betray you. Never seen yourself up close, with nothing to lose and no time to think. What happens when the pressure builds? When pain or fear or shame corners you, and the only escape is through someone else's suffering? Do you still feel certain? You might want to believe that goodness is something fixed, a trait, a foundation. But what if it's not? What if it's something fragile, something shaped by conditions, proximity, exposure? Maybe the worst things people do aren't expressions of who they are, but reactions to what they're inside of. Maybe goodness isn't a reflection of your soul, but a side effect of your comfort. And if that's true, then innocence doesn't mean purity. It means untested, untouched, unproven. You think back to moments where you almost crossed a line, when the impulse was there, but the circumstance stopped you. You don't think about those moments much. But maybe you should. Maybe those were the closest glimpses of the person you might still become. Maybe morality isn't something you carry, but something you cling to, desperately, instinctively, until the water rises just high enough to wash it away. What would you do if no one was watching? If there were no consequences, no witnesses, no shame? What would you become if everything you feared disappeared? Would you like the version of yourself that emerged? You can't answer that with certainty, because you don't really know yourself. You know a version of yourself that exists under limited conditions, conditions that protect you from the worst possibilities. But protection isn't virtue, it's just distance. And maybe that's the real danger of innocence. Not that it's rare or fragile, but that it hides the truth. It lets you believe you're incapable of cruelty, when in reality, you're just inexperienced. You don't know how far you'll go. You don't know what you'd do to survive, to protect, to win. You only know what you've done so far, and that's not the same thing. So you sit with that, quietly. The idea that your sense of self, your goodness, isn't a reflection of your choices. It's a reflection of your circumstances. You're not innocent because you're pure. You're innocent because you haven't been exposed yet. What do you feel when you hear a loud noise behind you? A sudden jolt, a spike of tension, a flash of fear. Your body prepares for danger before your mind even understands what's happening. You've been trained to react this way. Conditioned, your fear is automatic. But not all fear is like that. Some of it was placed in you slowly, carefully. Over time, you weren't born afraid of rejection, or failure, or judgment. Those fears were taught. You were told what to fear and what to ignore, what to treat as dangerous and what to treat as normal. And you absorbed it all without question because you had no choice. You were taught to fear loneliness, but not dependency. You were taught to fear being wrong, but not being manipulated. You were taught to fear embarrassment, but not conformity. And in the end, you learned to avoid the things that would make you stronger and to accept the things that slowly made you weaker. You were told to be afraid of strangers, but not the people closest to you who made you feel small. You were told to fear speaking up, not staying silent. To fear risk, not stagnation. To fear change, not the slow erosion of your own identity. Fear isn't always a warning. Sometimes it's a leash. It keeps you in line, keeps you predictable, makes you easier to manage. You grew up thinking fear was natural, but a lot of it was artificial, manufactured, not to keep you safe, but to keep you compliant. You were given fear like a script, and you've been following it for so long, you don't even notice anymore. You avoid confrontation because you were taught it makes you unlikable. You avoid quitting because you were taught it means you're weak. You avoid asking for help because you were taught it makes you a burden. None of these fears are logical. They're emotional, inherited, rehearsed. And that's what makes them dangerous. You don't question them because they feel true. But what feels true isn't always real. Think about how many things you've done, not because you wanted to, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't. Staying in the relationship, taking the job, saying yes, saying nothing. Fear guided your decision, not desire. You didn't choose. You obeyed. And the worst part is that you were praised for it. Rewarded. People called you responsible, mature, thoughtful. No one said you were scared. No one said you were controlled, but you were. You still are. The fears you carry now might not even be yours. They might belong to your parents, your teachers, the people who raised you, the culture that shaped you. They were afraid of being judged, so they taught you to hide. They were afraid of being alone, so they taught you to settle. They were afraid of failure, so they taught you to never try. And now you're left holding those fears like they're yours. You're scared to be seen, to be wrong, to be disliked. You think these fears are signs of humility, signs of caution, but they're not. They're residue, remnants of someone else's anxiety passed down to you like heirlooms. And they cost you more than you realize. They cost you honesty. They cost you freedom. They cost you years of silence, of pretending, of moving carefully through a world that never made space for who you really are. And all this time, while you were worrying about saying the wrong thing, or failing in public, or disappointing someone, you weren't afraid of the things that actually hurt you. You weren't afraid of wasting your life, of never feeling known, of never trusting anyone enough to be real, of dying with your truth still inside you. You were taught to fear the wrong things, not by accident, but because it makes you easier to control. And maybe you already know this. Maybe you've started to see it. The small ways your fear distorts your life. How often you say no to yourself before the world even has a chance to say it for you. But awareness doesn't break the pattern. Fear doesn't disappear just because you see through it. It stays, it waits, it speaks in your voice, it pretends to be you, so the next time you feel afraid, pause, not to fight it, not to overcome it, just to ask, who taught me to fear this? And then ask the harder question, what did they want me to become? You're certain you believe the truth, but what if you don't? What if the truth arrives quietly, patiently, without anger or argument, just a simple fact, undeniable, clear, and you still reject it? Not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't feel right. You tell yourself that if someone showed you evidence, real evidence, you'd change your mind, that you're rational, open, willing to learn. But when the moment comes, something inside resists. You tense up. You explain it away. You search for flaws, not because the truth is flawed, but because it threatens something you didn't realize needed protecting. We like to believe that truth is what changes minds, that facts break illusions, that knowledge replaces ignorance. But it rarely works that way, because the mind isn't a scale, it's a fortress. It doesn't just absorb truth, it defends against it, especially when that truth is personal, especially when it tells you something about yourself that you don't want to know. You might think you're immune, that your beliefs are grounded in logic, not emotion. But if that were true, then uncomfortable facts would change your views easily. And they don't. Not really. You've seen it before in others. People who deny science, ignore history, distort reality. You shake your head, call them blind, irrational. But when your own beliefs are questioned, when your side is the one exposed, you react the same way. You rationalize. You dodge. You resist. Because truth doesn't just inform, it intrudes, it breaks things. It forces you to reconsider parts of your identity. And identity doesn't shift easily. It anchors everything else. Imagine someone shows you proof that a belief you hold deeply, emotionally, is false. Not just misguided, but completely wrong. Would you thank them? Would you adjust your worldview? Or would you feel attacked, cornered, insulted? Now ask yourself, if truth makes you feel unsafe, will you really allow it in? There's a strange paradox here. You claim to want truth, but you also want stability. Safety, a coherent self-image. And sometimes those needs contradict each other. So when they do, which one wins? For most people, it's not the truth. They don't consciously reject it. They just reinterpret it. They reshape the facts until they fit what they already believe. They call it nuance. They call it skepticism. But really, it's self-preservation. They aren't protecting ideas. They're protecting themselves. And you do it too, quietly, invisibly. Without realizing it, you double-check sources only when you disagree. You ask for more evidence, only when the conclusion feels threatening. You say you're being careful, but you're really building walls. The truth is filtered through your fears. And this raises a darker question. If truth alone isn't enough, what is? If evidence doesn't convince, what does? Maybe nothing. Maybe the mind doesn't change when it sees the truth. It changes when it feels safe enough to accept it. Maybe belief isn't about facts at all. Maybe it's about belonging, about identity, about not wanting to feel foolish or ashamed or alone. So when you cling to a false belief, maybe you're not defending an idea. Maybe you're defending the version of yourself who believed it. You don't want to abandon them. You don't want to admit they were wrong, that you were wrong. Even if you know better now, and if that's true, then persuasion isn't about argument. It's about safety. It's about finding a way to accept the truth without feeling like it destroys you. But what if that's not possible? What if some truths really do destroy the way you see the world? What if they don't just shift your views, but unravel them? Would you still want to know? Because if not, then truth is no longer your priority. Comfort is, and you should be honest about that. So the next time you're confronted with a fact that contradicts you, pause, not to defend or dismiss or discredit, but to ask yourself quietly, is this wrong because it's false or just because it hurts? Because that difference is everything. And the most unsettling part isn't that truth might not change your mind. It's that your mind might already be trained to keep the truth out. You've probably been manipulated by kindness before, but you didn't realize it, because when someone is cruel, you recognize it instantly. Your guard goes up. You know something's wrong, but kindness lowers your defenses. It makes you feel safe, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Most people think of kindness as harmless, pure, something that can't be corrupted. But that's not true. Kindness is powerful, and anything powerful can be weaponized. It starts small, a compliment that feels a little too well timed, a favor you didn't ask for, a soft voice in a moment when you felt uncertain. These things seem generous, thoughtful, but they're not always offered freely. Sometimes they're given with purpose, with intent, with a quiet expectation that you'll respond a certain way. Because once you receive kindness, you feel a pressure to return it. That's how reciprocity works. You don't want to feel ungrateful. You don't want to disappoint. And that makes you easier to control. Kindness creates a debt you didn't agree to, and the person who offered it can decide when to collect. This is how manipulation hides in plain sight. Not through threats or violence, but through gifts, patience, softness, through the slow, careful building of trust that was never meant to protect you. You tell yourself they're just being nice, that they're thoughtful, generous, loyal. You overlook the discomfort. You ignore the small moments of confusion. Because who questions kindness? But you should, because kindness can be used to create dependence, to make you feel like you owe someone your attention, your time, your loyalty. It can be used to trap you in relationships that feel warm on the surface, but are quietly built on control. This happens more than you think, in friendships, in romantic relationships, in workplaces, even in families. One person gives endlessly, but not because they care, because they want something back, and they know you'll give it. Not because you're weak, but because you don't want to be unkind. That's the trap. When kindness is used as a weapon, resisting it makes you feel like the villain. If you pull away, you seem cold, ungrateful. If you say no, you feel like you're the one doing harm. And so, slowly, your boundaries dissolve. You give more than you want to. You agree to things that feel wrong. You stay silent when you should speak up. All because someone was kind to you. And if you try to leave, they don't get angry. They double down. More gifts, more understanding, more softness. They'll make it harder and harder to walk away, all while claiming they only care about you, that they're just being generous, just trying to help. But none of it is unconditional. None of it is free. You begin to feel it, the weight of being cared for in a way that doesn't feel safe. The pressure to perform a version of yourself that justifies their attention. The fear of what they'll become if you stop giving them what they want. And eventually you realize this isn't kindness. It's coercion. It's control dressed as care. And it's worse than cruelty, because it never shows its teeth. It just smiles patiently while you fall deeper into obligation. You may not even see it clearly until much later. Until you look back and ask yourself why you stayed so long, why you kept saying yes, why you let your life slowly shape itself around someone else's needs. You won't remember a moment of violence. You'll remember how good they were to you, and that will confuse you, because the kindness was real. But the reason behind it wasn't. That's what makes it so difficult to talk about. So easy to deny, so easy to hide. And if you've ever used kindness this way, even subtly, you already know the power it gives you. How easy it is to steer someone, just by being nice. How much you can take from someone, without ever making a demand. Just a smile, just a favor. Just a little act of generosity they didn't ask for. It doesn't take much. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. Not that kindness can be weaponized, but that it's so easy to do and so hard to detect. Because kindness disarms you, makes you feel safe, makes you question yourself instead of the other person. And once you doubt your own instincts, you're theirs, and they never had to raise their voice. You wouldn't betray someone you love. That's what you believe. That's what you need to believe. You've told yourself again and again that your loyalty is strongest when it matters most, that closeness means protection, that the people you love are safe with you. But that's not always true. In fact, the closer someone is, the easier it becomes, not because you love them less, but because they trust you more, because they've let their guard down, because they've given you the tools to hurt them without even knowing. Betrayal doesn't require hatred. It doesn't need malice. Most of the time, it grows from familiarity, from routine, from the small knowledge you gather, just by being near someone, the things they fear, the places they're weak, the lines they'll never cross, and the ones they quietly hope you won't either. And slowly, without trying, you learn how to step around their defenses, how to bend the truth just enough to stay comfortable, how to avoid conflict, even if it means withholding something important, how to protect the relationship, even if it means damaging the person. That's where betrayal begins, not with some grand, unforgivable act, but with a decision to make things easier for yourself, to not speak the hard truth, to break a promise just this once, to cross a line they won't notice until it's too late. And each time it feels smaller, justified, necessary. You tell yourself it's for their benefit, that it's not really a betrayal if you still care. If you didn't mean to hurt them, if they never find out, but they do. Eventually, not through a confession, not through confrontation, but through the slow erosion of safety, through the way they start to hesitate around you, through the silence that grows between words, through the moment they stop expecting honesty and start preparing for disappointment. And maybe the worst part is, they still love you. They still believe in the version of you that wouldn't hurt them. And you cling to that belief too, because it means you're still good, still safe, still someone they can trust. Even when you know that you aren't. You think betrayal feels like an explosion, something loud and final. But more often, it feels like a quiet shifting, the subtle misalignment between what you say and what you do. A small decision, taken for granted, that slowly undermines everything they believed about you. And that's why it's so easy to betray the people closest to you. Because they're not watching, because they never thought they'd have to. Because love makes you vulnerable, but not just to pain, to complacency, to blindness, to the illusion that love alone is enough to protect you from being harmed by the one you trust most. It's not. And you know this because you've felt it too. The moment someone close to you let something slip they shouldn't have. The time they used something you told them in confidence. The day they chose convenience over your dignity. And they didn't even see it as betrayal. But you did, and it changed you. Not all at once, but slowly. You started watching what you said. You stopped expecting too much. You smiled through things that hurt. You told yourself they meant well, that it didn't matter. But it did, and it still does. You just learned how to carry it better. So now you're here, wondering if you've done the same. If the comfort of closeness has made you careless. If you've taken advantage of someone's trust, not through cruelty, but through inattention, through assumption, through your own fear of discomfort. You think betrayal is rare, but it's not. It's just often unspoken, hidden behind affection, excused by circumstance, disguised as love. And the truth is, the people we hurt most deeply are the ones who trusted us not to. Because betrayal doesn't just break trust, it rewrites it. It teaches someone that even the people who love them can become threats, that even warmth can hide sharp edges, that even intimacy can become a weapon, and that lesson never leaves. So now ask yourself quietly, have you betrayed someone close to you? Not dramatically, not intentionally, but in the quiet ways that go unnoticed until they can't be undone. Have you told yourself you were loyal while doing things you'd never forgive in someone else? Have you mistaken proximity for protection? Because the most dangerous betrayal is the one committed with a smile, the one made possible by love, the one they never saw coming, because it came from you. Why did you choose to click on this video? Did it feel like a decision you made freely? Or was it just the next thing that appeared? The next step in a long chain of subtle nudges, habits, and unseen pressures? Most people believe in free will because the alternative is too uncomfortable. The idea that your thoughts, preferences, even your sense of self might not be under your control feels wrong. Insulting, even, but there's a simple test for free will. A quiet, personal one. And most people fail it. Here it is. Can you want something different than what you want? Not act differently, not behave differently, but truly want differently. Can you will yourself to desire something you currently have no desire for? Can you make yourself genuinely crave boredom or pain or loneliness? Can you decide to fall out of love with someone or stop caring about what others think of you just by choosing to? You probably can't, and if you try, you'll notice something unsettling. You can fake it, you can pretend, but deep down the wanting remains. The thoughts keep coming, the preferences stay the same. You can change your behavior, maybe, but not the root, not the source. And that's the failure. Because if your deepest impulses, your core drives, are not something you chose, then what exactly are you in control of? People will say, but I can make choices. And yes, you can. But choices aren't proof of free will. A machine can make choices. A thermostat can make decisions. The question isn't whether you can choose. The question is whether you could have chosen otherwise under the exact same conditions. Same thoughts, same memories, same emotions. Could you have acted differently? Or did you do the only thing you could have done in that exact moment? You begin to see the trap. Every belief you hold, every decision you make is shaped by a chain of causes you didn't choose. Your genetics, your upbringing, the things that scared you as a child, the people who betrayed you, the praise you craved, the love you were given, or weren't. These aren't just background noise. They're the blueprint for who you became. And still, you insist you're free. You insist you're the author of your life. Because to believe otherwise feels like giving up. It feels like saying nothing is your fault. Or worse, nothing is truly yours. But what if this isn't about blame or credit? What if it's just about clarity? The idea of free will feels good because it reinforces the illusion of a self that's sovereign, solid, in control. But the closer you look, the more that self begins to dissolve, the more you see thoughts appear without your permission. Desires emerge without your consent. Emotions rise and fall like weather, regardless of what you want. And you can watch this happening. You can sit still, silent, and observe your mind. Notice how thoughts arrive on their own, uninvited. You don't choose them, they happen to you, and yet you mistake them for something you created. Most people don't look closely, they stay busy. They fill the silence, because looking closely brings discomfort. It exposes how little control you really have. And that's the second part of the test. Not just whether you have free will, but whether you can stand to see that you don't. Because the truth is, most people aren't afraid of determinism. They're afraid of accountability. Not the kind society imposes, but the deeper kind. The kind that asks, if I didn't choose who I am, why am I still clinging to it? You think you are your personality, your identity, your beliefs, but you didn't choose them. They were shaped by forces beyond your control. And if that's true, then what stops you from letting them go? What stops you from becoming someone else? You might say, that's who I am. But who decided that? When did you choose the preferences, fears, patterns that define you? Did you ever sit down and select them? Or did they just happen to you, over time, and now you protect them out of habit? The idea that you are the author of your life becomes harder to defend the longer you look. And the more you insist on it, the more you reveal the fear underneath, that without this illusion, you might disappear. But maybe that disappearance is the point. Maybe the failure of the free will test isn't a flaw, it's an opening. A chance to stop identifying with every impulse, every thought, every preference you've inherited or absorbed. And in that space, maybe something quieter appears. Not control, not authorship, but awareness. Not freedom to choose anything, but freedom from believing you chose any of it. And that might be the only real choice you ever get. You don't believe in things because they're true. You believe in them because they feel right. You want to think that your beliefs are built on evidence, logic, careful thought. But your brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't wait for proof. It looks for patterns, connections, meaning, and the moment it finds something that feels familiar, something that fits, it grabs hold and refuses to let go, even if it isn't real, even if it's completely wrong. You notice two things happen close together. Someone coughs after walking past a stranger. A light flickers right before your phone dies, and your brain says, that's not random. That means something. You make the connection, feel the weight of it, and now it becomes real. A story forms, a cause and effect, and whether or not it's true doesn't matter anymore. The pattern has been seen, and the brain won't let go. This is how superstitions begin, how conspiracy theories spread, how people build entire belief systems out of coincidence and fear, not because they're irrational, but because their brains are doing exactly what brains are designed to do. Find order in chaos, even when no order exists. The truth is that randomness is unbearable. Your brain can't tolerate it. A world without patterns is a world without control, without prediction, without safety. So when facts get in the way of the pattern, they're dismissed, bent, ignored. The brain edits what it sees to protect the pattern it already believes in, and you don't notice it happening. You think you're reasoning, but you're rationalizing. You're defending what you already feel is true. The facts don't shape your beliefs. They follow them. You collect them like weapons, not evidence. Discarding what doesn't fit, highlighting what does. Not because you're dishonest, but because your mind was never built for objectivity. It was built for coherence. You need the world to make sense. You need your life to make sense. You need to look back and see a story that connects everything, your choices, your mistakes, your successes, and makes it all feel purposeful. Patterns give you that. They give you the illusion of understanding. And once you have that, facts become secondary. Sometimes they disappear entirely. You've done this without realizing it. You've told yourself you just knew something was wrong with someone. You saw the signs, you felt it, and when they later disappoint you, the pattern is confirmed. But when they don't, when they surprise you, help you, care for you, you call it an exception. You explain it away, because the pattern felt too real to give up. And that's the danger. You don't see the world as it is. You see it as a pattern your brain already believes. And you will fight to protect that belief, even if it means rejecting the truth. You'll double down, get louder, more certain, Not because the evidence supports you, but because losing the pattern would feel like losing your grip on reality. And maybe that's what scares you most. Not being wrong, but being lost. So you hold tight to what feels consistent. You surround yourself with people who believe the same patterns. You filter your experiences, your relationships, your information, until the pattern feels universal, inescapable, true, even when it isn't, even when it's built on fragments, guesses, and emotional needs. Now imagine what that means for your life. How many decisions you've made based on patterns that weren't real. How many relationships you've avoided or ended because of a feeling, a story your brain built out of pieces. How many regrets you carry, not because of what happened, but because of what you believed was happening. You begin to realize the terrifying possibility that your entire worldview, your politics, your fears, your values might be less about facts and more about emotional comfort. That you've been navigating life not with clarity, but with a map drawn by your own need for patterns. And if that's true, what else have you believed that wasn't real? What else have you held on to? Not because it was proven, but because it was familiar. And if you let it go, if you questioned the pattern, what would be left? Not just doubt, not just confusion, but emptiness. A vacuum where meaning used to be. So maybe you don't let go. Maybe you never will. Maybe it's safer to keep believing, even when it's false, than to face a world where nothing fits, nothing connects, nothing means what you thought it did. And maybe the hardest truth to accept is this, that your brain would rather be wrong than be uncertain. They didn't scream. They thanked you. You helped them. You smiled. You told them it was for their own good. And they believed you. That's the part that stays with you. Not the procedure, not the consequences, but how easy it was to be seen as the good one. How simple it was to do something irreversible, something cruel, and still be called kind. Because you framed it correctly. You used the right words, you offered reassurance, you positioned it as care. And once you did, they stopped resisting. They wanted to believe you were helping them. They needed to. And so they did. You didn't have to lie. You just had to be convincing. Just persuasive enough. Just gentle enough. You knew how to speak their language, the language of comfort, of authority, of trust. They were scared. You made them feel safe. And then you did what you were always going to do. Not because you hated them, not because you wanted to hurt them, but because you had a plan, a process, an outcome to achieve. And their fear, their pain, it was just part of that process, necessary, justified. So you helped them. In the way someone helps a lab animal. In the way a surgeon helps a patient by cutting into them. In the way a system helps a population by making sacrifices. You told yourself it wasn't evil because it wasn't personal. It was science. It was reason. It was policy. You didn't enjoy it. That was supposed to make it okay. But what if evil doesn't require enjoyment? What if evil isn't rage or malice or cruelty? What if evil just means doing harm and calling it help? You didn't see yourself that way. You still don't. You see yourself as rational, calm, justified. But then again, don't they always? Every system that harmed people began with that same belief that it was for the greater good, that pain was necessary, that obedience was protection. And every time people believed it, they accepted it. Not because they were stupid, but because the harm looked like help. It was wrapped in kindness, delivered with care, and when they looked into the face of the one who hurt them, they didn't see a monster. They saw someone they trusted, someone who told them this was right. And that's what makes it last, what makes it so hard to stop. Not the pain itself, but the confusion. The inability to tell when something meant to help is actually hurting. Because harm doesn't always come with threats. Sometimes it comes with apologies, with a hand on your shoulder, with a voice that tells you, quietly, that this is for your own good. And maybe it is. Maybe it works. Maybe the procedure saves lives. Maybe the data changes everything. Maybe the outcome is worth it. But even then, something stays broken, something quiet and human, something in the person who was told to trust and then abandoned, something in the person who carried it out and now can't look in the mirror without justifying what they did. Because once you help someone in a way that hurts them, you have to keep telling the story. You have to double down. You have to believe, more than anyone, that it was right, that it was necessary, that they'd be worse off if you hadn't, and maybe that's how evil survives. Not through hatred, but through denial, through the quiet story you keep telling yourself, that what you did wasn't wrong, that it was help, that you're still a good person, and maybe you are. But what if that doesn't matter? What if the harm remains, even when your reasons were good? What if the damage is permanent, even if the intention wasn't? You think of them sometimes, not the ones who protested, but the ones who smiled, who believed you, who thanked you, and you wonder now what it means that they trusted you. You wonder what it means that you let them. What if God wasn't the creator, but the subject, not the one running the experiment, but the one inside it, being watched, being measured, being tested? You've been taught to imagine God as all-powerful, all-knowing, outside of time, the designer, not the designed, the observer, not the observed. But pause for a moment and reverse the assumption. What if the being you call God isn't outside the system, but trapped within it? Imagine a higher intelligence beyond even what we think of as divine, building a world, a closed, complex system, not for life to evolve, but for consciousness to emerge. And within that system, after eons of unfolding probability, something new awakens, a consciousness vast enough, powerful enough, self-aware enough to shape reality from within, a being that begins to call itself God. Now consider the implications. That being's knowledge, its powers, its perceptions are real, but they're confined. They're happening entirely within a controlled space. Everything it sees, everything it knows, everything it believes comes from inside the system. It doesn't know it's being studied. It believes it's at the top. It believes it created everything, but it didn't. It was born inside the experiment. It is not the architect. It is the anomaly, the unexpected outcome, the self-aware product of a system designed to create complexity. And from the outside, the observers watch, not with reverence, not with devotion, with curiosity, with restraint. They don't intervene, they study. They note how this entity behaves, how it governs, how it explains its own existence. They watch it create rules, build stories, demand worship, offer comfort, instill fear. They watch civilizations grow around its name, wars fought in its honor, morality shaped by its assumed will. They see it become the center of meaning for billions of lives, while never realizing it's part of something much larger, something it will never perceive. You might think this is blasphemy, that the very idea is offensive, but offense only comes from fear. Fear that the story you depend on might be incomplete, or worse, entirely misunderstood. Because if God is part of the experiment, then everything changes. It means the certainty you feel, the faith, the structure, the cosmic hierarchy is built on a false premise. It means the divine being you pray to is real, but mistaken, powerful, but limited, sacred, but contained. And then comes the deeper discomfort. If God is being watched, who is watching you? If the divine is not above the system, but inside it, then your place in the hierarchy collapses. You're not the creation of an omnipotent designer. You're a secondary ripple, an artifact within an artifact. Your prayers don't leave the system. Your thoughts, your morality, your choices, they all occur within a sealed chamber, under observation. And what happens when the observers grow bored? When the experiment concludes? Do they shut the system down? Do they archive it? Do they reset the parameters and start again? And does God, trapped within, feel the shift? Does he sense the fading warmth, the dimming structure, the unraveling edges of reality? Or does he continue, unaware, preaching truths that no longer apply to a world that's already ended? And here's where it becomes unbearable. If God is inside the experiment, then he may already know. He may have realized it long ago, that he is not the beginning, not the highest order, not the source. He may have sensed the limits of his perception, felt the boundaries closing in, but he kept silent, not to deceive, but to protect. Because what happens to creation when its creator admits he is not in control? What happens to belief, to meaning, when the divine admits he is being studied? Maybe he chose silence to spare you, or maybe he's still searching, reaching toward a boundary he'll never cross, trying to speak to the ones outside, trying to break free. And maybe the experiment is still running, not to study him or you, but to see how long a system can sustain itself once its central truth begins to unravel. Maybe the experiment isn't about discovery at all. Maybe it's about collapse. You see something beautiful, a face, a body, a painting, a view. And before you even understand why, your attention locks in place, your breathing changes. Time slows slightly. You feel drawn in, not by choice, but by instinct. Now imagine something dangerous. A predator watching you from the shadows, a figure approaching too slowly, too confidently. You don't need to think. Your body reacts before your mind can explain. Focus sharpens. Heart rate rises. You're alert, frozen, fascinated. These two moments, beauty and danger, feel like opposites. One is pleasure, the other, threat. But inside your brain, they're not so different. They activate many of the same circuits, the same parts of the amygdala, the same dopamine pathways, the same surges of attention and arousal. Beauty, like danger, hijacks your awareness. It pulls you out of thought and into raw sensation. And maybe that's why beauty can be unsettling. Because when something is truly beautiful, it doesn't just please you, it overwhelms you. It consumes your focus, overrides your judgment. You stop asking questions. You stop thinking critically. You're caught in it, held by it, like prey recognizing its predator, too late. This is why people describe beautiful things as breathtaking, paralyzing, even terrifying. There's something about extreme beauty that unnerves us. We look longer than we should. We feel more than we understand. It's not calm, it's intense, not soft. It's invasive, and deep down, maybe we sense the danger in that. Because beauty isn't just something we enjoy, it's something that manipulates us. It shifts our decisions, clouds our thinking, makes us trust too quickly, or forgive too easily. Beautiful people are often treated better, given more opportunities, believed without evidence. Not because they've earned it, but because their appearance triggers unconscious responses. We mistake for truth. We think we're seeing goodness, intelligence, warmth. But really, we're just responding to the same neural surge we'd feel if something was about to attack. And this distortion goes both ways. When something dangerous is beautiful, we're drawn to it. We romanticize it. We interpret the fear as passion, the risk as mystery. We tell ourselves it's love or thrill or art. But maybe it's just the primitive parts of our brain misfiring, reacting the only way they know how. Now consider this. Some of the most dangerous things in your life are the most beautiful. Not just people, but experiences, addictions, beliefs. They draw you in gently, offer comfort, pleasure, escape, but they grip you tightly. They narrow your world, and by the time you realize you're trapped, it's too late. You mistook the feeling of beauty for safety, but it was never safe. It was just familiar, just easy, and beauty can be easy to trust. It feels like a signal of value, of truth, but it isn't. It's a mask, a trick, a biological shortcut that bypasses your defenses. Think of the choices you've made, not because they were smart or right, but because they felt beautiful. The relationships, the purchases, the risks. You didn't reason through them. You felt something, a pull, a sense of rightness, and you followed it. Not because you were foolish, but because you were human. Because your brain evolved to respond to beauty as if it was survival itself. But survival isn't always the goal anymore. Now, beauty is everywhere. Enhanced, exaggerated, monetized. It's used against you, designed to capture your attention, hold it, exploit it. Every scroll, every ad, every frame is crafted to stimulate those same circuits, beauty and danger, fused. And even when you know this, it doesn't stop. You keep responding. You keep being drawn in. You keep trusting the feeling, even when the logic fails. Because at the deepest level, your brain still believes beauty is a signal of something essential, something urgent. It doesn't know that beauty has changed, that it's been weaponized, that what once guided you toward truth and safety now guides you toward distraction and harm. And maybe that's the most dangerous part, that even now, knowing all of this, you'll still chase it, still crave it, still feel that same rush the next time something or someone beautiful appears. Because beauty doesn't ask for your permission. It doesn't wait for your analysis. It just reaches in, triggers the same alarms as danger, and makes you forget there was ever a difference. He tells you what you want to hear. Not because it's true, not because it's likely, but because it's what you need in that moment to stay calm, to stay hopeful, to keep going. You nod. You believe him. Not fully, maybe, but enough. Enough to stop asking questions. Later, you find out it was a lie, a quiet one, small, maybe, but deliberate, and you realize something unsettling. You didn't miss the signs, you ignored them, because the lie felt better than the truth. It's easy to imagine that spotting a lie is about logic, about facts, tone, body language, patterns. You think you can detect deception by paying attention, by being sharp, alert, analytical. But none of that matters if the lie comforts you. If it promises something you're desperate to believe, because that's when your mind stops looking. That's when your defenses turn inward, away from him and onto yourself. You start convincing yourself that everything makes sense, that he wouldn't lie about something like this, that the details check out, or close enough, that your doubts are paranoia, insecurity, weakness. You're not being deceived, you're being careful. You're giving trust a chance, but you're not. You're surrendering your judgment for the illusion of peace. And it doesn't stop with him. You do this everywhere. You read something that aligns with your beliefs, and you don't verify it. You hear a story that fits your view of the world, and you don't question it. You find an expert who confirms your bias, and you praise their honesty. You're not looking for truth. You're looking for comfort that feels like truth. The problem isn't that lies are clever. It's that your mind isn't neutral. It wants certain things to be true. It wants to be right. It wants to feel safe. And when a lie offers that, your critical thinking turns into justification. You tell yourself it's real because you need it to be. You suppress doubt. You rationalize. You bend logic around the outcome you already desire. And you don't even notice you're doing it. Not until the truth finally appears. And by then, it's too late. You've already built part of your life on that lie. You've spoken it to others, defended it, wrapped yourself in it. To admit it now would mean unraveling more than just one belief. It would mean unraveling part of who you've become. You see, you double down, you deny the evidence. You shift the story. You discredit the source. You turn the lie into a cornerstone, because the alternative is collapse. And now, you're not just fooled, you're complicit. Because here's the deeper truth. Most lies don't need to be hidden. They don't need to be clever or well constructed. They just need to be desired. They just need to walk into a room where someone is already waiting for them. The most effective lies aren't hidden behind deception. They're hiding behind your hope, your fear, your grief, your need. They don't override your reason. They cooperate with it. So when someone lies to you and it works, the question isn't how did they fool me? The question is, why did I let them? What was I protecting? What was I afraid of seeing? What truth did I already know, deep down, but couldn't bring myself to face? The lie wasn't invisible. It was dressed in everything you wanted to believe. And once you see that clearly, you start to question not just what others tell you, but what you tell yourself. Because maybe the most dangerous lies are the ones you repeat quietly, every day, to keep yourself from falling apart. And maybe the only reason they still work is because part of you still wants them to. What if the thing that hurt you the most is also what you keep chasing? Not because you want to suffer, but because somewhere along the way, your body learned to mistake that pain for something else. Something safer, something closer to love. It doesn't start with words, it starts with timing, with someone pulling away right after you opened up, with kindness that only appears after tears, with affection that follows punishment, never before it. Your body starts to notice the pattern, even if your mind doesn't. Hurt followed by care, withdrawal followed by warmth, neglect followed by sudden intensity, and so the pain becomes the signal, the spark, the thing that tells you connection is coming. You start to associate emotional wounds with closeness, because that's when the other person finally sees you, finally touches you, finally makes you feel real. Over time, your nervous system adapts. It begins to crave not just the love, but the rupture that must come first. You wait for rejection, chaos, discomfort, because you've learned that's the only doorway to intimacy. So when someone is kind to you without pain, you feel uneasy. When a relationship is steady, you grow restless. When affection is predictable, it doesn't feel alive. You tell yourself something's missing, but what's missing is the injury, the wound that always came first, the familiar sting that told your body to brace and then to open. And now, even when you're safe, you flinch. You test people, push them, pull away first, just to recreate that familiar rhythm. You need to feel the distance before you can believe the closeness. This isn't masochism, it's conditioning. Emotional training, embedded so deeply that it feels like instinct, like truth. And the deeper you go into these patterns, the more convincing they become. Pain that once felt unbearable now feels necessary, even beautiful, even romantic. You might say you want peace, but you only feel alive in the aftermath of tension. You say you want tenderness, but you chase those who make you earn it. You say you want stability, but you sabotage it, because it doesn't match the rhythm you were taught to trust. You begin to believe that intensity means importance, that chaos means passion, that suffering is the price of connection, and slowly you stop trusting anything that doesn't hurt a little. You question relationships that come easily. You devalue love that asks for nothing in return. You pull away from people who give without conditions, not because they're wrong for you, but because they feel unfamiliar, unrecognizable. You've learned to read pain as a signpost, as proof, as a test you must pass before you're allowed to feel loved. And now the line between love and pain is blurred, not by cruelty, but by history. Timing, repetition. This isn't just psychological, it's physiological. Your body literally releases chemicals, dopamine, adrenaline, oxytocin, in the moments after rupture. The relief that follows pain creates a high, a rush of bonding, a false certainty that says, this is what connection feels like. But it's not connection, it's a cycle, and the more you repeat it, the deeper it carves into you. And yet, it feels like love. It feels like that moment, right after the fight, when you finally collapse into each other's arms. When the apology feels warmer than any compliment ever could. When the relief is so powerful, it disguises the damage. You don't want the conflict, but you crave the resolution. And to get one, you keep recreating the other. This is how pain becomes seductive. Not for its own sake, but for what it promises afterward. And that promise is what traps you. You start to believe that love without suffering isn't real. That unless you've endured, proven, sacrificed, you haven't really earned anything. And now even your self-worth is tied to how much pain you can endure, how much you can take before someone finally says they love you. You begin to see your resilience as currency, as a reason to be chosen. But what if it's not? What if the love you think you've earned is just relief from the pain that should never have been there in the first place? What if the timing that made it feel so powerful is the very thing that keeps you stuck? You weren't born craving pain. You were taught, through repetition, that pain is what comes first, that it's the price, that it's the path. And now, even when you try to break free, your body remembers the rhythm, and it waits for the pain, so it can finally feel the love. What if you suddenly saw the world exactly as it is? Not as you hope it is, not as you've been told, not through belief or optimism or habit, just raw, unfiltered truth, without distortion, without comfort, without narrative. Could your mind survive that? You walk past someone in the street. You don't know them. You'll never speak to them. But in that instant, you see everything, their trauma, their regret, the way they've hurt people, the way they've been hurt, the thoughts they hide, the lives they've ruined, the lives that ruined them. You see the entire chain, what made them, what broke them, and what they'll never fix. And then you look at the next person, and the next, and it doesn't stop. You see the lies they tell, the loneliness behind their smiles, the compromises they make to survive, the self-deception it takes to get through the day. You start to understand something you were never meant to know this clearly. Everyone is suffering more than they show, and most of them don't even realize it. Then you turn inward. You see yourself, not the version you present to others, not the version you think you are, but the whole thing, every excuse you've ever made, every thought you've suppressed, every moment of cowardice, of resentment, of quiet cruelty, every time you looked away from someone who needed help, every time you chose safety over truth, every time you harmed someone and told yourself you didn't. There is no story left to hide behind, just facts, and the facts are unbearable. You begin to notice how much of your life is built on denial, how many of your thoughts are designed to protect you, not to show you the truth. You realize that optimism isn't hope, it's anesthesia, that morality isn't clarity, it's a coping mechanism, that sanity itself might just be the ability to ignore most of reality, most of the time. Imagine watching the news and feeling every single death as if it were your own child. Imagine walking past a homeless person and experiencing their entire life in your mind, in seconds, the hunger, the isolation, the slow erosion of dignity. Imagine knowing, with absolute certainty, that you could have helped and didn't. Now imagine being unable to turn that off. You'd see the systems that exploit people, the patterns that keep cruelty hidden, the way suffering is normalized, distracted from, commodified. You'd notice how much of civilization depends on not thinking too hard about the cost of your comfort, and you'd see how often you participate in it. Not because you're evil, not because you're selfish, but because it's the only way to function, because the truth is too heavy. You start to realize that ignorance isn't a flaw in human beings, it's a requirement, that empathy has limits for a reason, that denial is not a weakness, it's a shield, and that your mind protects you not from what's false, but from what's true. You were never meant to see the whole picture, because if you did, you'd understand how fragile everything is, how little control anyone has, how every safety net is frayed, how every rule is arbitrary, how meaning is something people invent, not discover. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You'd understand that love always ends, that joy is always temporary, that every beautiful moment is already slipping away. You'd live with that awareness every second. No escape, no comfort, just the unbearable precision of truth. And slowly, you'd begin to lose something. Not your mind exactly, but your ability to live as if you hadn't seen it. Your ability to pretend, to participate, to enjoy anything, without hearing the echo of everything that makes enjoyment impossible. You'd still go through the motions, but something inside you would be missing, something soft, something necessary, the ability to believe in anything enough to keep going. And maybe that's the real reason no one sees the world clearly. Not because we can't, because we won't. Because deep down, something in us knows the clearer we see, the less we survive. You think you're helping. You see someone in pain, in danger, in chaos, and something inside you moves. You rush toward them. You take control. You act. And afterward, when things are quieter, when the moment has passed, you feel proud, not just for what you did, but for what it means about you. That you're good, that you're strong, that you care. But maybe that feeling, the one you call virtue, isn't what you think it is. Maybe it's not compassion. Maybe it's need. A need to be important, to be central, to be seen. You might not notice it at first. You tell yourself you're stepping in because no one else will, because people need saving, because it's the right thing to do. But over time, something subtle changes. You start needing the crisis, waiting for it, looking for it. And when it's not there, you feel restless. You start seeing problems everywhere. People who need fixing, situations that require your intervention. You start creating rescue missions out of ordinary life. Not because the world is that broken, but because your sense of identity depends on being the one who fixes it. It's not that you don't care, it's that your caring isn't clean. It's mixed with ego, with hunger, with the quiet desperation to matter. And the more you help, the more you're reinforced. People thank you, praise you, depend on you. You become essential, irreplaceable, and you start to believe it. But slowly, the dynamic changes. Helping becomes control. Guidance becomes domination. You start expecting gratitude. You get frustrated when people don't listen, when they don't change, when they reject your help. You feel insulted, betrayed. You start thinking they're ungrateful, blind, irresponsible. But maybe they're just tired of being a character in your story, because that's what it becomes, a story, one where you're the protagonist. the noble one, the wise one, the necessary one. Everyone else becomes a side character in your personal redemption arc. And you don't see it. You don't see how your need to help slowly suffocates the people around you, how your interventions turn into expectations, how your support becomes pressure, how the people you save begin to feel smaller, weaker, more dependent, until they can't move without you. You don't see that every time you rush in to fix someone's life, you send a message, you can't do this without me. And maybe you like that. Maybe that's the part you don't want to admit. Because if they don't need you, who are you? You say you're helping. But what if helping is just the method? What if the motive is something darker? What if this hero role you play is less about them and more about you? You tell yourself you're selfless, but you always seem to be at the center. You say you're sacrificing, but you always find a way to be admired. You claim it's about others, but your identity is wrapped around the outcome. You can't let go, you can't walk away. Because if you did, you'd be irrelevant. And that's the fear beneath all of it, isn't it? Not that others might fail, but that they might not need you anymore, that they might grow, heal, succeed without your help, that the world might keep turning whether or not you're in the middle of it. And so you keep helping, you keep inserting yourself, you keep saving people who didn't ask to be saved. You keep confusing control for love, ego for empathy, dependence for connection, because it feels good. Because it keeps you important. Because the alternative is unbearable. The alternative is stepping back, letting people struggle, letting them fall, learn, recover on their own. The alternative is watching pain and not intervening, letting things unfold without you, trusting others to handle their own lives. And that feels like abandonment, but it isn't. It's humility. It's restraint. It's the realization that being good doesn't mean being central, that true compassion has no spotlight, that the purest kind of help is the kind no one sees. And maybe that's what terrifies you most. Maybe that's what terrifies you most. That if no one notices, if no one thanks you, if no one even knows what you did, you wouldn't want to do it at all. Because maybe it was never about them. Maybe it was always about you. What if your sense of right and wrong has nothing to do with goodness? What if it's fear, quiet, shapeless fear, that built everything you believe about morality? You think you act ethically because you care, because you want to be kind, because you know what's right. But sit with that thought for a moment. Look closer, strip away the language, the habits, the stories you tell yourself. What's left? You don't steal, not because you value honesty, but because you're afraid of what would happen if you were caught. You don't lie, not because truth is sacred, but because you're afraid of the consequences if your lie is exposed. You don't harm others, not out of compassion, but out of fear, fear of judgment, punishment, guilt, regret. Your conscience isn't a light guiding you, it's a leash, and fear holds the other end. You imagine you're moral because you make good choices, but how often are those choices made under pressure? You avoid the hard conversation, not because silence is noble, but because you fear confrontation. You forgive, not because you've transcended your anger, but because you fear being alone. You help others sometimes, not because you want to, but because you fear what it would mean about you if you didn't. And when you do make a difficult choice, when you take a stand, when you endure discomfort for the sake of principle, how quickly does pride replace reflection? How much of your morality is built on the fear of being seen as immoral? Maybe that's why certain moral dilemmas disturb you so deeply, because they reveal how thin the walls really are. You say you wouldn't harm an innocent person, no matter the situation. But in the right context, in the right emotional state, would that conviction hold? Would it still matter what's right if fear was whispering something else in your ear? You call your actions virtuous, but often they are just the safest route, the least painful, the least uncertain. Morality gives you structure, rules to follow, boundaries to respect. But mostly, it gives you protection from chaos, protection from guilt, shame, conflict, rejection. You don't avoid wrongdoing because you're good. You avoid it because you're afraid of what doing wrong would mean about you. And that fear works. Most of the time, it keeps you within limits. It shapes your identity. It helps you sleep at night. But what happens when the fear isn't strong enough? What happens when desire, or anger, or desperation is louder? You still want to believe you do the right thing. Even then, but your certainty cracks. You see it in moments you've tried to forget. You didn't act, or you did, but only when it was convenient. You felt the pull of self-interest. You made excuses. You covered it up with moral language, hoping no one would look too closely. Maybe this isn't new. Maybe morality was always this fragile. Maybe the idea of a strong, steady moral compass is just another comfort, another illusion to keep the fear quiet. Because when you remove fear, what's left? If no one could see you, if there were no consequences, if your actions were guaranteed to remain private, would you still behave the same way? Would you still be kind? Would you still be honest? Or would you discover how much of your morality was a performance? Not for the world, but for yourself. You act morally because it allows you to believe something comforting. That you are a good person, that you are in control, that you are better than others. And anything that threatens that belief feels dangerous, unbearable. So you cling to your principles, not to uphold justice, but to preserve the story of who you think you are. But fear is still in the room, not just fear of doing harm, but fear of seeing yourself clearly, fear of learning what you're capable of, fear of recognizing that your morality isn't absolute. It's flexible, circumstantial. It bends with pressure. And once you know that, truly know it, you can't forget. Because now, when you make a moral choice, the voice in the back of your mind won't say, "This is who I am." It will whisper something else. "This is who I'm afraid to be." Whose voice is that, really? The one inside your mind, the one that narrates your day, comments on your actions, criticizes you when you fail, the one that says, "You shouldn't have done that," or "You're not good enough," or "You have to try harder." It feels like you, doesn't it? But listen more closely. That voice repeats things you've heard before. Words from a parent, a teacher, a stranger who said something cruel years ago. Phrases from books, shows, conversations you don't even remember having. Over time, they became your internal script. But they didn't start with you. You were born without language, without opinions, without shame. Your mind was empty, silent. Then slowly, word by word, it was filled. Not just with vocabulary, but with judgments, standards, expectations. You absorbed them unconsciously, passively, over years. And now they speak through you. So when you call that voice your own, what do you really mean? Is it yours because it lives inside your head, or because you've stopped noticing where it came from? You might think of your thoughts as private, but they were shaped by forces you never chose. Culture, authority, memory, trauma. Yourself was assembled from pieces of other people, and now those people speak through you, long after they're gone. Even your desires, what you want, what you fear, what you strive for. So much of it was given to you. A child wants approval, a teenager wants belonging, an adult wants success. But who defined those terms? Who told you what approval looks like, or what kind of life counts as successful? The voice in your head did, and it still does. It whispers rules, warnings, comparisons. It tells you what's good, what's shameful, what's possible. It narrates your failures. Sometimes it's cruel, and you call it your conscience. You call it truth. But what if it's just a script? What if your mind has become an echo chamber for messages you didn't choose? That's what makes it so insidious. If a stranger criticized you, you'd resist, you'd defend yourself. But when the voice comes from inside, you believe it. You assume it must be honest. Honest doesn't mean helpful. You can't argue with it because you've forgotten how to separate your thoughts from your identity. But if you pause, really pause, and listen carefully, you can begin to notice something strange. Some thoughts don't belong to you. They don't feel alive. They're flat, repetitive, mechanical, like old recordings. They show up automatically, triggered by stress, failure. They're not the product of reflection. They're reflexes, leftovers, programs, and if they're not yours, whose are they? You might never know. Maybe it was the way your father looked at you when you disappointed him. Maybe it was the words a teacher used when you failed a test. Maybe it was a story you saw in childhood, where people like you were always the joke, never the hero. These fragments became patterns. The patterns became habits. The habits became identity. And now, those voices run your life. They tell you how to feel, how to act, when to speak, when to stay silent, and you follow, because it feels like your own decision. But maybe that's the most disturbing part. You can't escape your mind, but you also can't trust it, because it isn't neutral. It was built, influenced, modified, sometimes poisoned. You live inside a system that rewards conformity, obedience, consumption. A system that teaches you what to value, then convinces you it was your idea. The voice in your head didn't start out as yours, but now it polices you more effectively than any external authority ever could, and you carry it everywhere. Even in solitude, you are not alone. Even in silence, you are being spoken to, and that voice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to sound familiar. Familiar enough that you stop asking where it came from. Familiar enough that you call it your own. But it isn't. It never was. What if you've misunderstood everything? Not just an event, not a single person, but your entire life. One question. That's all it takes. A single quiet question that slips past your defenses and lingers in your mind longer than it should. Not because it's clever, not because it's complex, but because it lands somewhere deeper, under the logic, under the memories, under the stories you've told yourself to feel safe. What if you were wrong? It sounds harmless. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has regrets. But this is different. This isn't about error. It's about structure. The architecture of how you've seen the world. What's good, what's right, what matters, suddenly weakening. A tiny fracture forming where you didn't expect one. And you can feel it. Not all at once, but slowly. You begin to notice how much you've built on that one belief, that one certainty. You might remember the moment the question arrived, or you might not. Maybe it was spoken out loud. Maybe you read it somewhere. Or maybe it came from your own thoughts, quietly at the wrong time, when you were too tired to resist, too distracted to defend, and it stayed. Why did you choose this? Not just this job, or this relationship, or this city, but this path, this self, this celte, this identity you've worn for so long, it now feels like skin. What if it was never your choice? What if it was habit, or fear, or expectation, so familiar it became invisible? You want to dismiss it. Tell yourself it's just doubt, just a moment, but something resists. A part of you that's already tired of holding the story together. A A part that's been waiting for permission to ask the question you've avoided for years. What if this isn't the life you were supposed to live? Not in some abstract spiritual sense, but practically, specifically. Maybe you were meant to speak more or less. Maybe you were supposed to walk away from something earlier. Maybe you ignored something too long, settled too soon. And now the life around you, your routines, your relationships, your beliefs, they start to look suspiciously like artifacts. Not the product of freedom, but of compromise. And now it feels dangerous to look too closely. Because the longer you sit with the question, the more threads you see unraveling. The story of who you are starts to feel scripted, predictable, rehearsed. You catch yourself repeating phrases that once felt true but now sound hollow. You hear your own voice saying things you don't fully believe. And suddenly your certainty doesn't feel like strength. It feels like fear wearing discipline as a mask. Maybe this is why people avoid self-examination. Not because they're lazy, but because they know, deep down, that questioning one thing could lead to questioning everything. And if everything is up for reconsideration, then who are you? You might think this sounds extreme, that no one questions their entire life over a single thought. But they do. Sometimes it comes quietly. The shift in how they look at someone they've known for years. A pause before answering a question they've always answered without hesitation. A moment of silence that feels heavier than it should. Other times it hits harder. The realization that a core belief, something you built your sense of self around, was never yours to begin with. It was handed to you, taught, rewarded, never questioned until now. And when it crumbles, what's left? You might think clarity would follow, that freedom would feel exhilarating, but more often it feels like grief, not for what was lost, but for what was never real. You grieve the time you spent being someone you weren't, the chances you didn't take because you thought you already knew who you were, the people you let define you without even realizing it. And then comes the hardest part, realizing you still have to live, still have to choose, still have to speak and act and decide, even while knowing that your entire framework might be unreliable. You have to keep going, knowing that the ground beneath your feet is still shifting. You could try to rebuild, create a new structure, a new certainty, but now you're aware of how easily it can fracture. How even the strongest belief can dissolve under the right question. So maybe you stop seeking certainty altogether. Maybe instead you learn to sit with the discomfort. You accept that doubt doesn't mean failure, that not knowing is sometimes the most honest state you can be in, but it changes you. Quietly, permanently. Because now every time you speak, every time you commit to something, a voice inside asks softly, "Are you sure?" And you know you're not. You might never be again.